Clara Bellamy did not make a sound when her mother grabbed her wrist at the trading post counter, pulled her forward like an item being presented for inspection, and said to the rancher standing across from them, "She cooks, she cleans, she won't cause trouble. I want 2 sacks of flour salt meat for the winter and a bottle of medicine for my husband. That's my price." Her own mother, putting a price on her, out loud, in front of the whole town. Clara didn't cry. She had run out of tears for this family a long time ago. If that first sentence just stopped your heart, hit subscribe right now and follow Clara's story all the way to the end, because what this rancher does next will change everything you think you know about what a woman is worth. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The morning her mother decided to sell her, Clara Bellamy had been up since 4 o'clock. She had learned years ago that the best way to survive in the Bellamy house was to be already useful by the time everyone else woke up. If the fire was lit, and the bread was started, and the coffee was hot before her mother's feet hit the floor, there was a chance, not a guarantee, but a chance that the morning would pass without anyone reminding Clara of how much she cost to keep. So she rose in the dark every single day. She worked in the cold before dawn, the way other people breathed automatically, without expecting thanks. Because thanks was not something the Bellamy house produced. She was kneading the second batch of bread dough when she heard her mother's footsteps in the hall. Not the slow waking up shuffle of someone easing into morning, but the deliberate, already decided footsteps of a woman who had been awake for a while thinking something through. Clara felt it before she could name it, a particular quality of tension in those footsteps that made her press harder into the dough and keep her eyes on the work. Her mother appeared in the kitchen doorway. Evelyn Bellamy was a woman who had been beautiful once and had never forgiven the world for the years that had taken it. She stood straight. She always stood straight. Even delivering the worst news of her life, she would stand straight. "Get your coat," she said. Clara kept her hands in the dough. "Sun's not up yet." "I know what time it is. The trading post doesn't open until 8. Harlan Fitch opens early for people with real business." Her mother moved past her without looking at her, sat down at the table, and folded her hands, the way she did when she had already closed a door in her mind that she did not intend to reopen. "We have real business." Clara pulled her hands from the dough. She turned to face her mother. "Mama, what kind of business?" Evelyn looked at her then. All the way at her the way she rarely did, and Clara felt the familiar sensation of being assessed, of being something on a scale that kept coming up short. The kind, her mother said, that solves a problem. What problem? The problem of this family surviving the winter. Her mother's voice was patient, almost kind. "Your father's debts are still sitting on this property. The bank will want answers in the spring that we don't have. The supply store is extending us no more credit." She paused. "I have found a solution." Clara looked at her mother for a long moment. "And the solution involves me going to the trading post before sunrise. The solution involves you being practical," her mother said, "the way I have always asked you to be." She should have demanded more. She would think about that. Later, think about all the questions she did not ask as she untied her apron and reached for her coat. But that was the particular damage of a life lived as a burden. After long enough, you stopped expecting explanations. You did what you were told and tried to disappear into the compliance of it, because asking questions only ever produced answers that confirmed what you already feared. She followed her mother out into the dark. The trading post sat at the center of Willow Creek's Main Street, wedged between the feed store and the land office. Harlan Fitch was inside when they arrived, moving with the methodical quiet of a man who kept his own counsel. He looked up when the door opened, and something shifted behind his eyes. Not surprise, but the uncomfortable recognition of a man who knows what kind of morning this is going to be. "Mrs. Bellamy," he said. "Mr. Fitch." Her mother went directly to the counter. "Is he here?" "He'll be along. Said he had stock to see to first." Clara looked between them. "Who are you talking about?" Her mother turned with an expression arranged into something that was almost gentle. "I've arranged a meeting, Clara, with Nathaniel Cross." The name was known in Willow Creek. the way a mountain range is known as something large and fixed and slightly removed from ordinary life. Nathaniel Cross owned the biggest ranch in 3 counties. He had built it himself over 15 years of work that the town respected without entirely understanding. He was a widower of 6 years, 38 years old, and he had the quiet, weathered reputation of a man who was fair in business and spoke rarely enough that when he did, people listened. "Why?" Clara said carefully. "Are we meeting with Nathaniel Cross?" Her mother folded her hands on the counter. "Because Nathaniel Cross needs someone to manage his household. His housekeeper left in September, and he has been without anyone capable since." Clara waited. She could feel where this road led, but she needed to hear her mother say it aloud. "I have spoken to his foreman," her mother continued. "His foreman has spoken to him. Mr. Cross has agreed in principle to take you on at the ranch." Her voice did not waver. "In exchange for your service there, he will provide us with winter supplies. Flour, salt, meat, medicine for your father." The silence in the trading post was absolute. Harlan Fitch found the inside of a crate suddenly and completely fascinating. Clara stood very still. She could feel the bread dough still living in the muscles of her hands, the push and pull of it, the labor of the last hour that had happened inside a house where none of this had been mentioned to her. Where her mother had sat across from her at supper last night and passed the salt and said nothing. Where her mother had known for who knew how long that today was coming and had decided that Clara did not need to be informed. "You are trading me," Clara said. "I am making a practical arrangement. For flour." "Clara. Mama." Her voice came out quieter than she intended, which was its own kind of answer to something she hadn't asked. "You are trading me for a sack of flour." Her mother's expression tightened, not with shame, with something closer to impatience. "Don't be dramatic. You will have a roof over your head and a situation that is better than this one. You didn't ask me." Clara heard her own voice like it belonged to someone standing at a slight distance. "You planned this. You arranged it. You walked me here in the dark, and you didn't ask me. I am your mother. I am making a decision for this family. You are making a decision for this family that involves selling me." "I am making a decision," Evelyn Bellamy said, and her voice went very low and very precise, the voice she used when she had decided to end a conversation, "that keeps a roof over your brothers' heads and medicine for your father and food in this house through February. I am making a decision that gives you, Clara, a situation where you are useful and housed and cared for, which is more than this family can continue to provide." She held Clara's eyes. "I know it is hard. I know you don't want to hear it. But you are 25 years old. You have had no prospects. No one has come for you, and that is not going to change." Her voice did not soften, but something behind it did just briefly, in a way that was somehow worse than hardness. "This is the best I can do for you. I need you to understand that." Clara felt it hit her, the way blunt things hit, not a sharp pain, but a spreading one. Because there was something in those words that was almost true. There was something in them she had told herself in the dark many times, that no one was coming, that she was 25, and unasked and unlikely to be asked, that her value lived entirely in her usefulness, and not in anything as precarious as being wanted. Her mother was not lying. Her mother was simply saying aloud, clearly, and with arrangements already made, the thing Clara had spent years trying not to believe. She was standing there in the cold trading post with bread dough drying on her hands and the gray Kansas dawn beginning barely outside the window, and she was trying to find the place inside herself where she could breathe through this when the door opened. The boots on the floorboard were heavy and unhurried. The footsteps of a man who had somewhere to be and had decided exactly how fast he needed to get there. She did not turn around. She was still looking at her mother, at the composed, closed face of the woman who had planned all of this while Clara was sleeping. "Mrs. Bellamy." "Mr. Cross." Her mother straightened. "Thank you for coming. As my message explained, I believe this arrangement would benefit both our situations considerably." Harlan Fitch had found something elsewhere in the store to be very busy with. A pause. Then the man's voice again, and this time it was not directed at her mother. It was directed at the room, but aimed precisely. "Who is this?" Clara turned. Nathaniel Cross was not what she had built in her mind from the town's descriptions. He was large in the way that working land makes a man large, not decorative, but structural, as though he had been built specifically to withstand. His face had been weathered past the point of conventional handsomeness into something more durable. He had dark hair going gray at the temples, and eyes the color of Winter Creek water, and he was looking at her with an expression she could not immediately name. Not pity, not the calculating assessment she had braced herself for, something steadier than both. He was not looking at her size. He was looking at her face. She had not expected that. "This is my daughter Clara," her mother said, moving smoothly back into the transaction. "She is an exceptional cook and housekeeper. She has managed our home for years without complaint. She is strong, reliable, and she will not give you trouble." Nathaniel Cross did not look at Evelyn Bellamy when she spoke. He kept looking at Clara. "Is that right?" he said. And then simply, "What do you go by?" "She just told you," Clara said, and heard the sharpness of it too late to pull it back. Clara Bellamy. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, adjacent to one. "Clara." He said it like a man making a note. "How old are you?" 25. "You've lived here your whole life?" "Yes." He nodded once, slow. Then he said, and his voice did not change in any way that she could measure, "Is this what you want? Or is this what everyone else decided for you?" It hit her directly below the sternum, like a hand pressed there. She heard her mother draw breath to answer. She said before Evelyn could speak, "She decided." Meaning her mother. Meaning she had not. Nathaniel Cross said, still without looking at Evelyn Bellamy, "I wasn't asking her." The trading post was absolutely quiet. Outside the window, the dawn was just starting to suggest itself gray and reluctant. Clara Bellamy stood in the cold with bread dough on her hands, and 25 years of answering the questions other people asked sitting on her like a physical weight. And someone had just asked her the right one. "I don't know what I want," she said, and her voice came out steady, which surprised her. "I only know," she stopped, pressed through it. "I want somewhere that I'm not constantly reminded that I cost more than I'm worth." Something moved in Nathaniel Cross's face. Brief, controlled, but real. The recognition of a man who knows a particular road because he has traveled it in his own dark. He turned to Evelyn Bellamy, then for the first time fully, and his voice was courteous in the way that iron is occasionally polished. "Mrs. Bellamy, I appreciate you reaching out. I won't be entering into the arrangement you've described." Evelyn's composure cracked at the edge. "Mr. Cross, if you'd consider the practical benefit." "I have considered it," he said. "My answer is no. I don't accept people as part of a goods exchange. That's not how I do business." His voice was even. It did not invite argument. "I'd suggest speaking with Harlan about the banknote on your property. He may be able to help you find a more suitable arrangement." He paused. "For the actual problem." He turned to Clara. "Miss Bellamy." He held her gaze without pressure, without hurry. "If you are looking for legitimate work with fair pay and decent conditions, I have a household position that's been empty since September. $50 a week, your own room, your meals. The work is hard, but it's honest." Another pause, and she understood that the pause was intentional, that it was making space for her. "That's an offer, not a transaction. You can say no." Her mother's voice came from behind her, sharpened to its finest edge. "Clara, think carefully." "I am," Clara said. "You have nowhere else to go." "I know that." "You will be completely on your own." "I know that too." "Clara." And here it was, the last card, the one her mother always held back until she needed it. Her voice dropped to something that was almost private, almost between just them. "I am trying to protect you. I have always tried to protect you. You don't see it because you're angry right now, but I am your mother. I know what the world does to women like you when they're alone in it. I am trying to keep that from happening." Clara stood very still, because there it was. "Women like you," said with a mother's voice wrapped in something that sounded almost like love and meaning. Every cruel thing the town had ever said. Too big, too plain, too much, not enough. The kind of woman who should be grateful for whatever arrangement came her way, because something was better than the nothing she was otherwise headed for. Women like you. She turned to Nathaniel Cross. Yes, she said. I accept. Her mother made a sound she had never heard from her before. Clara did not look back. You said the wagon is outside. Yes. Then I'm ready when you are. She walked to the door of the trading post. She did not run. She kept her back straight and her chin level, and she pushed the door open into the gray morning air and stepped out onto the street of the town where she had spent 25 years being invisible, and she breathed. Just breathed. For a moment she let herself stand there and feel the cold and the enormous terrifying weight of what she had just said. Then she walked to the wagon. It was a working ranch wagon, solid, functional, built for use rather than impression. The horse was a 16-hand bay with an authoritative manner and the expression of a horse who has formed opinions. She did not wait for assistance. She had been climbing things her whole life. She gripped the side of the wagon and pulled herself up to the bench and settled herself with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the road ahead. Nathaniel Cross came out of the trading post 2 minutes later. He climbed up the other side, gathered the reins, and clicked the horse into motion, and they drove out of Willow Creek in the early morning quiet without ceremony and without looking back, and for a long time neither of them said a word. It was Clara who broke it. I should tell you, she said, I'm a very good cook. I heard that. Not just adequate. My bread is excellent. My stews have carried men through hard winters. I'm telling you this so you know what you're actually getting for the $1.50. That almost smile again at the corner of his mouth. I believe you. I also want to be direct about something. She kept her eyes on the road. I know what people will say. A woman leaving town in a rancher's wagon before breakfast after what happened in that trading post. People will construct a story. People in Willow Creek are generally not short of stories, he said. I want you to know that I intend to work. I'm not looking for anything beyond what you offered. Honest wages, honest work. I don't want you to have any misunderstanding about what I expect. Miss Bellamy. His voice was quiet. Final in the way that rivers are final, not aggressive, just entirely itself. You don't need to explain yourself to me. You haven't done anything that requires justification. She pressed her lips together. All right. But I'll say one thing. He kept his eyes on the road. What happened back there, what your mother attempted, I won't be forgetting it. And whatever arrangement exists at Cross Ranch will be between two people who have freely agreed to it. Nothing else and nothing more. She nodded. Her throat was tight in a way she couldn't entirely account for. Thank you, she said. He nodded once, said nothing further. They rode on through the Kansas morning, the light coming up slow and flat across the grassland, and Clara sat on the bench of a stranger's wagon with nothing but her coat and her skills and the stubborn, battered thing inside her that had refused even this morning, even in that trading post, to lie all the way down. Cross Ranch came into view gradually, the way serious land tends to, not announcing itself with grandeur, but revealing itself through evidence of consistent, patient work. Good fencing, straight and well maintained. Pasture managed rather than merely occupied. The house was large by frontier standards, 2 stories of weathered timber with a wide porch and a kitchen addition built onto the back, when the original structure proved too small for the work required inside it. A foreman was crossing the yard when the wagon pulled up, rangy, somewhere between 40 and 60, with the deeply lined face of a man who had spent his life outdoors, and the eyes of one who had learned to assess situations quickly and keep his assessments to himself. Boss, he said. Tom. Nathaniel set the brake. This is Miss Bellamy. She'll be managing the kitchen and the house. Set her up in the back room. He looked at Clara. Tom Avery, my foreman for 11 years. Anything you need when I'm not available, Tom's who you ask. Tom Avery looked at her with an expression that committed to absolutely nothing. Ma'am, he said. Mr. Avery, she said. A pause. You cook, he said. Exceptionally, she said. Tom Avery looked at his employer with the carefully contained expression of a man trying not to have an opinion too visibly. The kitchen was enormous. She stood in the middle of it and did a slow professional inventory. Wood stove large and well made. Prep table adequate. shelves in organizational chaos that would take an afternoon to remedy. A larder through a narrow door, she checked it immediately, mentally cataloging what was there and what was not. A kitchen garden visible through the back window, past the end of its autumn production, but clearly tended with some care by someone who knew what they were doing. The disarray was not the disarray of neglect. It was the disarray of a household that had been competently managed and then lost its manager. There was good material here. It had just lost its shape. She could give it back its shape. "What do the men eat?" she asked. Nathaniel Cross was in the doorway. He had removed his hat. She noticed that he held it at his side, rather than putting it on the table, a small courtesy that most men didn't bother with in their own kitchens. "Whatever's been produced," he said, "which lately has been passable at best." "What time is breakfast?" 6. "Supper?" 6. "Midday?" "Whatever can be managed." She nodded. She was already moving, already opening the larder again, with purpose this time, rather than inventory. "Do you have preferences? Foods you won't eat?" He seemed to genuinely consider this question as though it had not been asked of him in some time. "I like food that tastes like someone cared about making it," he said finally. Clara turned and looked at him from the doorway of the larder. "That," she said, "I can do." He nodded and left her to it. And she put her coat on the hook by the back door, rolled her sleeves to her elbows and began. By noon the larder was reorganized. The shelves were ordered, and she had produced a midday meal that the three ranch hands, Billy, a lanky 20-year-old from Missouri, Pete, a weathered 40-something whose primary communication was a rich vocabulary of silences, and Pete's nephew Jed, who had inherited the silence wholesale consumed with the focused reverence of men who had unexpectedly encountered something excellent. Tom Avery cleaned his plate twice. He said nothing about it. She understood that was a review. Billy, the youngest, stayed after the others had gone back to work. He stood near the door with his hat in his hands, working up to something. "That was real good, ma'am," he said finally. "Thank you, Billy. I mean..." He searched for words with the earnest difficulty of a young man whose feelings outpaced his vocabulary. "I mean, that was the best food I've had since I left home. My mama used to make biscuits that tasted something like those biscuits." He stopped, regrouped. "I'm from Missouri," he said. "Been out here 2 years. Sometimes it feels like..." He stopped again. Clara wiped down the prep table and waited. She had learned long ago that people who needed to say something usually could, if you just gave them enough quiet to get to it. "Sometimes it feels like a long way from everything," Billy said. "Is all." "It is a long way from everything," she said. "That's true." He nodded, put his hat back on. "Well, thank you for the biscuits, ma'am." "They'll be there tomorrow," she said. "Same time." He almost smiled on his way out the door. She found her room that first evening. The back room Tom Avery had prepared with a window that faced east for morning light and a door with a latch on the inside. She stood in it with the lamp lit and listened to the ranch settling into its night sounds. Horses in the paddock, the distant conversation of cattle, the wind coming down off the foothills, talking to itself through the fence posts. She had never had a room to herself. Not once in 25 years. She had shared a room with her 2 younger brothers until she was 12, then slept on a cot in the kitchen when the house needed the space because she was Clara, and Clara was practical, and Clara would manage. Clara always managed. She sat on the edge of the bed. She thought about her mother's voice in the Trading Post Women Like You. She thought about a specific moment, not the worst moment, but one that had lodged itself years ago and stayed there. She had been 17. There had been a town dance, the kind she knew she would not be asked to, and she had pretended she didn't want to go, and her mother had looked at her across the supper table and said matter-of-factly, without cruelty, and somehow worse for it, "It's better not to expect things you won't get, Clara. It saves everyone the embarrassment." And Clara had nodded and said yes. Mama, and helped clear the table and gone to bed early so no one could see her face. She had been nodding and clearing tables ever since. She put her face in her hands, and she cried. Not loudly. She had never cried. Loudly. Loudness had always felt like an imposition, like taking up more space than she'd been allocated. But she cried fully, in the way that she almost never allowed herself to, because she was behind a door with a latch on the inside, and no one could see her. And she was 25 years old, and she had spent those 25 years believing that love was something you earned by being useful enough, by shrinking enough, by costing as little as possible. And this morning her own mother had named a price for her in a trading post, and even the price had been small. She cried until she reached the bottom of it. And the bottom, when she got there, was not despair. It was something quieter and stranger than despair. Something that was almost, in its exhausted way, a beginning. She washed her face at the basin, straightened her back, sat for a moment in the silence of her own room. Then she picked up the lamp and began planning what she would make for breakfast. The days that followed had a rhythm she settled into more naturally than she'd expected. Before dawn, fire bred the particular steadiness of beginning again. The kitchen was hers to manage, and she managed it the way she managed everything, thoroughly, systematically, without waiting to be told twice. The meals improved. The stores were organized. The kitchen garden was assessed and preserved against the coming cold. With the remaining produce, she turned into a week's worth of soups and pickles and stored goods. The hands adapted with the practical acceptance of men whose primary interest was being adequately fed, and who had discovered they were being fed substantially better than adequately. Pete left a repaired pot handle on the kitchen porch one morning without comment. Jed once appeared silently at the kitchen door with extra firewood and stacked it before she'd registered he was there, leaving before she could say anything. Billy came every day after meals to linger near the door and talk about Missouri, about his mother's cooking, about the particular loneliness of being young and a long way from home, and she listened because she knew what it cost to finally say things out loud. Nathaniel Cross ate at the table with his men. She had not expected that. She had assumed he would take his meals separately. The house was large enough. There was a separate dining room that had once been used for more formal purposes. He did not. He sat at the long kitchen table, ate the same food as everyone else, and participated in conversation with the focused economy of a man who entered it when he had something worth saying and otherwise let it move around him. He said please. He said thank you. He asked her opinion about the kitchen garden plan for spring as though he actually wanted the answer, and when she gave it specifically with reasons, he listened and said he'd have Tom look into the seed supply. She watched him. She couldn't help it. She watched the way he managed the ranch without raised voice, without performance, simply knowing what needed doing and doing it, and expecting the same from the people around him. She watched the way he spoke to the horses. A man who is patient with animals in private has decided that patience is worth practicing when nobody awards him for it. She told herself she was simply being observant. She told herself observation was a professional requirement. She told herself a great many useful things, and went back to her bread. The first indication that Willow Creek was tracking her presence at Cross Ranch came on a Thursday afternoon when she drove the wagon into town for supplies. She had not been back since the morning she left. She walked into the general store and found two women at the counter, Margaret Henderson and Ruth Pratt, both wives of prominent men, both equipped with the specific conversational weaponry of women who have never needed to be direct because indirect has always worked better. They looked at her the way she expected to be looked at. Then Margaret Henderson said with a smile, "Clara Bellamy, well, you look settled." "I am, thank you." "Out at Cross Ranch?" "Yes." The look that passed between the two women was the kind that carried 3 conversations inside it. Ruth Pratt said pleasantly, "And how is Mr. Cross finding things with the new arrangement?" "The ranch runs very well," Clara said. "Mr. Cross is an efficient operator." "I imagine he must be," Ruth said in a tone that technically said nothing and actually said everything about what the town had decided Clara's presence at the ranch meant. Clara placed her list on the counter in front of the storekeeper, who was performing a masterful impression of a man who could not hear. "Cross account," she said. "I'll need it loaded." She held herself straight through every moment of the transaction. She thanked the storekeeper by name. She did not look at Margaret Henderson or Ruth Pratt again, and when she walked out of the store, she crossed to the wagon and climbed up and set Samson moving before the door had closed behind her. She was a mile outside of town before she let the breath go. When she came back to the kitchen, Tom Avery was at the table with his coffee. He waded through her, putting away the supplies. Then, "Town all right?" "Perfectly fine," she said. "Uh-huh." She closed the larder. "People talk, Mr. Avery. It's not new information." "No," he agreed. "It ain't." He turned his cup. "For what it's worth, I know it ain't my place. The men think you're doing fine work. Real fine. Billy said it's the best eating he's had since his mama's table." She looked at him. "Thank you." "Boss thinks so too," Tom said, still looking at his cup. "Not a man who makes speeches about it, but you can tell by the way a man comes to a table what he thinks about what's waiting there." He stood, rinsed the cup. "Just so's you know." She thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. 3 nights later, she was up at 2 in the morning again. The bad dreams having startled her awake. Not nightmares, but the particular dreams of unresolved things. Her mother's face arranged into that careful, almost kind expression. The trading post. The word arrangement. The word women like you. She lay in the dark until the 4 o'clock instinct rose in her, and she got up and went to the kitchen. Nathaniel Cross was already there. Howe was at the table with a lamp and a cup of water. Not coffee, just water and land documents spread in front of him, and he looked up when she came through the doorway, and they both went still for a moment, in the mutual surprise of people who had each assumed they were alone. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know you'd be—" "You're up early," he said. "I couldn't sleep." "Sit down," he said. "I'll move the papers." "You don't need to." "Sit down, Miss Bellamy." She sat. She built up the fire after a moment, because she needed something to do with her hands, and he returned to his papers, and the lamp put a warm circle on the table, and outside the window, the dark was total. No gray in the sky, yet the ranch completely still around them. After a time he said without looking up, "Bad dreams." She considered. "Yes." "Anything you want to say out loud?" She thought about it honestly. "Not yet," she said. "All right." She started on the bread. The rhythm of it steadied her push and fold, the resistance, and the give, the physical logic of a thing that responded to what you put into it. They worked in parallel silence, that was, she realized with some surprise, entirely comfortable. "Nathaniel," she said after a while. He looked up. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "When you heard what my mother had arranged, what made you respond the way you did?" She kept her hands in the dough. "By any practical measure, it was an advantageous situation. For you." He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, "I didn't want an advantageous situation," he said. "I wanted someone who was here because they chose to be." "Why does that matter to you?" He set his pen down. He looked at it for a moment. "My wife," he said, and his voice was steady, but she could hear the care behind the steadiness, the way a man speaks when he has learned to carry a particular weight without letting it show, "didn't choose to stay here at the end. She was here because she couldn't see any other option. And I—" He stopped, started again. "I wasn't paying enough attention to see what that was costing her, until it was too late to do anything about it." Clara's hands were still in the dough. "I decided after that," he said, "that I would rather have an empty house than a full one built on someone being trapped in it." She said quietly, "I'm sorry. About your wife. It was a long time ago." "That doesn't necessarily make it shorter." He looked at her across the table in the lamplight. Something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, not in a way he would have chosen, but enough. "No," he said. "I reckon it doesn't." They stayed like that in the kitchen, in the quiet before dawn, her hands in the bread, his papers in the lamplight, the fire building slowly behind the stove grate, and she thought about what he had said, about choosing, about the difference between staying because you could not leave and staying because you had decided to remain. She had not thought until this morning that there was a version of staying that could be chosen freely. She had only ever stayed because there was nowhere else to go. She shaped the loaves, set them to rise, and when she looked up, the sky outside the kitchen window was beginning just barely to consider the possibility of morning. She had come to Cross Ranch with nothing but her coat and her skills, and the particular endurance of a woman who had never once been given the luxury of giving up. She did not know yet what this place was going to become. She did not know what she was becoming in it. But she was here. She was exactly the size she was. She was not shrinking. She was not apologizing. She was not trying to disappear. And for the first time in 25 years in this kitchen before dawn, with bread rising and lamplight, and a man who had decided that choosing mattered, that felt not just like enough. It felt like the beginning of something she did not yet have a name for, but intended to find out. Outside, the Kansas sky was lightening at the edges. And somewhere in the walls of the house, a door she had not known existed was quietly without ceremony beginning to open. The bread never lied. Clara had learned that years ago, kneading dough in her mother's kitchen before the house woke up. Bread told you exactly what it was. If you rushed it, it showed. If you neglected it, it collapsed. If you put your whole self into it, it came out exactly right every single time, without politics and without opinion. Bread was the most honest thing she knew how to make. So when Billy came through the kitchen door on a Tuesday morning in October and stood there with his hat in his hands and his face arranged into the expression of someone who has heard something he wishes he hadn't, she knew before he opened his mouth that whatever was coming was going to be the other kind of morning. "Ma'am," he said. She kept her hands in the dough. "Spit it out, Billy." He looked at the floor, then at the window, then finally at her. "I went into town yesterday evening, for tobacco, and I heard some things." "What kind of things?" He shifted his weight. "The kind folks say when they think nobody who matters is listening." He turned his hat brim through his fingers. "Mrs. Henderson was at the dry goods talking to a couple of ladies. She said—" He stopped, tried again. "She said Mr. Cross must be real desperate for company out here to have taken in somebody like you, and that you probably didn't give him much of a choice, given how you ended up here." Clara's hands stopped moving. "She said your mama did what she had to do." Billy continued, and his voice had gone tight with the discomfort of a young man being asked by circumstance to say things he found ugly. "She said a woman your size and situation ought to be grateful. Anybody took her in at all. And that whatever arrangement you and Mr. Cross had worked out, it wasn't the kind a decent woman would have agreed to." The kitchen was very quiet. "Thank you for telling me," Clara said. "I told her she was wrong," Billy said quickly. "I told her you were the best cook this ranch had seen in years, and that Mr. Cross was lucky to have you. She told me I was a foolish boy who didn't understand how these things worked." Despite everything, Clara almost smiled. "She's not entirely wrong that you're young." "I'm not wrong about you, though." She looked at him then. He was 20 years old and a long way from Missouri, and he had gone into a dry goods store for tobacco and ended up defending her to a woman twice his age. She thought about what that had cost him, small as it seemed the social arithmetic of a young man establishing himself in a new town, the particular courage required to say something unpopular to someone with standing. "No," she said. "You're not wrong about me." She pulled a portion of dough from the batch and set it in front of him. "You can knead that if you want something to do with your hands." He sat down at the table and started working the dough with the inexpert enthusiasm of someone who has never done it before and is grateful for the occupation. They worked in a silence that was not uncomfortable. After a while he said, "Does it bother you what they say?" Clara was quiet for a moment. "Does it bother me that people I've known my whole life have decided what I am and see no reason to look any further?" "Yes, Billy, it bothers me." She shaped a loaf. "But people who have already decided something are very difficult to argue with. So you just do the work and let the work speak." "What if the work doesn't speak loud enough?" "Then you make it louder," she said. She carried that conversation through the rest of the day, turning it over, the way she turned dough pressing at it, feeling where it held and where it gave. She was not naive. She had known when she climbed into Nathaniel Cross's wagon on that gray morning that the town would construct a story about her. Small towns were not short of stories, and they preferred the kind that confirmed what they already believed. What she had not fully anticipated was the speed of it. Barely 3 weeks, and already the narrative was settled. Clara Bellamy, the woman who had maneuvered herself into the Cross Ranch through her mother's scheming, trading on desperation because it was the only currency a woman like her had. The story had the efficient architecture of rumors that satisfy it explained everything required no evidence and reflected badly on its subject in ways that were difficult to directly disprove. She was thinking about this that evening in the kitchen after supper, when Nathaniel Cross came in from the barn. He came in the back door the way he always did, stomping the mud from his boots on the threshold, and he stopped when he saw her still at the table with the lamp going over the kitchen accounts she had begun keeping at her own initiative. He looked at her face, and something in what he saw there made him pull out the chair across from her and sit down. "Something happened," he said. It was not a question. She had noticed he rarely asked questions when he already knew the answer. "Billy went to town yesterday," she said. "He heard things. He told me this morning." "What kind of things?" she told him. Plainly, without editorializing the way she would have reported a supply shortage or a problem with the stove. When she was done, Nathaniel Cross sat across from her with his hands flat on the table and an expression she could not fully read. "I'm sorry," he said. "It's not your fault." "It's partly my fault," he said. "My foreman contacted your mother's household to inquire about domestic help. That set this in motion." "My mother set it in motion," Clara said. "You just happened to be the rancher she reached." He looked at her steadily. "Does it bother you what they're saying?" She thought about what she had told Billy. Then she thought about the more honest answer she hadn't given him. "What bothers me," she said, "is that I can't disprove it. The story they've decided on, I came here because I had no choice. I stay here because I have nowhere else to go, and whatever understanding exists between us is something a decent woman wouldn't have agreed to. I can't stand up in the middle of Main Street and announce that my situation here is exactly what you said it was in that trading post. They'll just say, that's what I would claim." "No," he said slowly. "You can't disprove it by saying so." He was quiet for a moment. But you can prove it by staying and working and being exactly what you are. People see what they're determined to see until circumstances make them see differently. The only thing that changes determined people is time and evidence." She looked at him. "You sound like a man who knows that from experience." Something shifted in his face there and gone, the way things moved across his expressions when he hadn't chosen to show them. "When Margaret Cross died," he said, "people decided I was responsible, not in any legal way. In the way people decide a man who loses his wife must have done something to contribute to it. It took 4 years before the town stopped looking at me sideways when I came for supplies." Clara was quiet. "4 years," she said. "4 years," he confirmed. "Give or take. What changed it?" "Time," he said. "And Pete Darrow's oldest son breaking his leg on a fence post in the middle of January with the snow coming down and no doctor for 30 miles and me getting there first." A pause. "Apparently setting a man's leg correctly at midnight in a blizzard carries more moral weight in this county than whatever they'd decided about Margaret." She almost smiled. She pressed it back. "So your advice is to wait for someone to break their leg." "My advice is to keep making the bread," he said. And there was something in his voice that was, she realized, humor, quiet and dry, and not directed at her, but shared with her, which was different. "The rest will follow." She nodded, looked back at the accounts. "Clara." He said her name without the miss for the first time, and something in that small shift of address landed in her chest, in a way she did not examine too closely. "You have as much right to be here as anyone on this property. More than some. What the town says doesn't change that." She looked up. "I know," she said. And for the first time since the trading post, she almost believed it. The following week brought the first real test of what she'd said she believed. She was in town for the weekly supply run loading flour sacks into the wagon bed when she heard her own name from inside the feed store. Not quietly. The voice belonged to a man, Robert Hatch. She placed it after a moment, who ran the feed operation and had a reputation for opinions delivered at a volume that suggested he considered them public property. "Bellamy girl," Hatch was saying, "has gotten herself real comfortable out at Cross Ranch from what I hear. Real comfortable. And Cross is a lonely man. Man's been alone a long time." A murmur from whoever was with him was, "I'm saying what everyone's thinking," Hatch continued. "That girl's mother tried to sell her and didn't get a buyer, so the girl went and sold herself another way. And Cross is a decent man, but he ain't made of stone, and when a woman is right there in your house every day. Clara set the flour sack in the wagon, straightened up, walked into the feed store. Robert Hatch was behind his counter with two men she recognized as neighboring ranchers. All three of them went completely still when she came through the door. "Mr. Hatch," she said. Her voice was entirely level. He had the decency to go red. "Miss Bellamy, I didn't know you were—" "No," she said. "You didn't." She walked to the counter. She put both hands on it. She looked at him steadily, and she said very quietly, so that it required him to lean forward slightly to hear, "I am going to say this once, and I am going to say it clearly, and I would appreciate it if you'd extend the same courtesy to everyone you've been speaking with this afternoon." She held his eyes. "I work at Cross Ranch. I manage the kitchen and the household. I am paid a fair wage for that work, and I do it well. That is the entire nature of my arrangement there. It is the same arrangement any housekeeper in this county has with any employer. The fact that people find it interesting to imagine otherwise says a great deal more about their imaginations than it does about me or Mr. Cross." Hatch opened his mouth. "I'm not finished," she said. He closed it. "I did not choose the circumstances that brought me to that ranch. But I chose to stay. And I will continue to choose it every day, for as long as the work is worth doing, and I am fairly treated. And I will tell you, Mr. Hatch, because I think you are capable of understanding this. I have spent 25 years being small and quiet and grateful, and I am done. I am done being small." She lifted her hands from the counter. "I need 50 pounds of oats on the Cross account. If that's not something you're prepared to accommodate, I'll ride to the next county." The two neighboring ranchers were looking somewhere else, with the particular commitment of men who would very much like not to have witnessed this. Robert Hatch said after a moment, "I'll have Jimmy load the oats." "Thank you," she said. She walked back out to the wagon and stood with her hand on Sampson's flank and let herself shake for approximately 30 seconds. Then she stopped shaking and stood up straight and waited for the oats. Tom Avery was on the porch when she got back. He looked at the wagon, then at her face, then at the wagon again. "How'd it go?" "Fine," she said. "Uh-huh." "I may have said some things to Robert Hatch that will be around the county by tomorrow." Tom was quiet for a moment. "What kind of things?" "The true kind." He nodded. He picked up his coffee from the porch railing where he'd set it. "For what it's worth," he said, looking at the middle distance. "Robert Hatch has been needing someone to say true things to him for approximately 15 years. She carried the oats inside and started on supper, and she did not think about what Nathaniel Cross was going to say when he heard about it, because she had decided not to think about that until she had to. She got through 3/4 of supper preparation before she had to. He came in from the north pasture at 5, which was early. He came in through the back and stopped in the kitchen doorway. She kept stirring the pot. "Tom tells me you had an interesting supply run," he said. "Tom is a very efficient communicator for a man of few words," she said. "He seemed to feel it was information I needed." A pause. "What happened?" she told him, the same way she'd told him about Billy plainly, completely, without asking for his reaction, before she'd given him the facts. When she finished, she turned from the stove to look at him, because she thought she owed him that much directness. Howe was leaning against the door frame with his arms folded and an expression on his face that she spent a moment trying to read. "Say what you're going to say," she said. "I'm trying to decide what that is," he said. "If you think I overstepped, I don't think you overstepped." His voice was even. "I think you said what needed saying to a man who needed to hear it, and I think you said it very well from the sound of it." He paused. "I think Robert Hatch is going to tell everyone in the county what happened in that feed store, and in about half of the versions you'll come out sounding formidable, and in the other half you'll come out sounding difficult. I know that. And you did it anyway." "I did it anyway," she said. "I'm done being small, Nathaniel. I told him that. I meant it." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his expression, the same thing she'd seen in the trading post in the kitchen before dawn, in the careful, controlled face of a man who had learned to keep his responses housed. Something that was not exactly admiration, but was something in the same county as it. "Good," he said. and went to wash up for supper. The versions of what happened at Hatch's feed traveled the way stories traveled in a frontier county exponentially, with embellishment reaching places Clara had never been in the form of variations she would not have recognized. The most charitable account had her as a wronged woman finally finding her voice. The least charitable had her as a calculating schemer working to establish herself. Most versions fell somewhere in between and varied depending on who was telling them and what they'd already decided about Clara Bellamy. What she had not counted on was the other women. It started with Dora Finch, who was married to one of the smaller ranchers north of town and had approximately no use for Robert Hatch on the best of days. She stopped Clara outside the dry goods 2 weeks after the feed store incident and said without preamble, "I heard what you said to Hatch. Good for you." Then she walked on. 3 days after that, a woman. Clara didn't know, tall, weathered, driving her own wagon with the confidence of someone who had been doing so since before Clara was born, pulled up alongside her on the road outside town and said, "You the Bellamy girl working Cross Ranch?" Clara said she was. The woman said, "My name's Ada Clements. My husband runs the Clements outfit about 8 miles east. We've been feeding our men bad stew for 2 months, and I'm desperate. Would you be willing to show me how you run your soup rotation?" Clara said she would. Ada Clements said, "Good. Thursday then, I'll bring a pie." Ada Clements came on Thursday and brought a blackberry pie that was, Clara noted, actually excellent, and they spent 4 hours in the kitchen while Ada took notes in a small book she produced from her coat pocket and asked questions with the efficiency of a woman who had been managing a ranch operation long enough to know that the fastest way to solve a problem was to find someone who had already solved it and ask them directly. When Ada left, she paused at the kitchen door and said, "For what it's worth, Dora Finch and I have had a theory about you for some time. We think you're exactly what you look like. A woman who knows what she's doing, who got put in an impossible position by her family and handled it with more grace than most people manage." Clara looked at her. "Most people don't agree with that theory. Most people don't come to my ranch on Thursdays to share their soup methods," Ada said pleasantly. "I find the overlap between people whose opinion I value and people who make good use of their time to be considerable." She tucked her notebook away. "I'll tell Dora what I've seen here. She's on the church committee with Margaret Henderson. It may not move mountains, but it moves the committee." After Ada left, Clara stood in the kitchen for a moment with the blackberry pie and thought about what it felt like to have someone say, "I think you are exactly what you look like," and mean it as a compliment rather than an accusation. It felt, she decided, like bread coming out right. November arrived with the particular unannounced authority of a Kansas November cold that was not a threat, but a fact. Wind that had made up its mind. Skies that went from gray to grayer, as though exploring a range of opinions about the same color. The work on the ranch changed with the season, the hands moving from the outdoor labor of the warmer months into the closer, harder, more technical work of winter preparation, and Clara's kitchen became the fixed point around which the whole operation oriented itself. She was grinding coffee one morning when Tom Avery came in looking like a man who had just made up his mind to say something he would have preferred not to. "Need to tell you something," he said. He sat down, did not take his coat off, which meant he wasn't planning to stay long. "Heard something in town last week I've been sitting on trying to figure if it's worth saying." Clara set the grinder down. "Is it?" "I think so." He turned his hat in his hands, the same gesture Billy used, she noticed, and she wondered if it was something Tom did habitually that the young man had absorbed without knowing it. "There's talk about your mother. She's been telling people, and I mean a number of people enough, that it's circulating that you took advantage of Mr. Cross's situation, that you encouraged the arrangement to happen because you saw an opportunity, that the trading post meeting wasn't something she pushed on you, but something you'd been angling toward." Clara was perfectly still. "She's saying you wanted this." Tom continued, his voice as neutral as he could make it, which was very neutral, but not completely. "She's saying you were always looking for a way to get yourself situated, and you used her to engineer it. And she's saying—" He stopped. "Say it, Tom." "She's saying you're the kind of woman who ruins a man's reputation by association, and that Nathaniel is too decent to see it." The silence in the kitchen was absolute. Clara felt something happen in her chest that was not quite grief and not quite rage, but was assembled from both. Her mother. Her mother had gone out into the county with this story, had taken the transaction that she herself had tried to conduct and reversed the direction of it, had made herself the victim of Clara's scheming, rather than the architect of Clara's humiliation. It was, she understood, a profoundly efficient piece of self-protection. Her mother had always been efficient. She picked up the coffee grinder and started again. "Thank you for telling me," she said. Tom looked at her for a moment. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing," she said. "Right now." "Miss Bellamy, there's nothing to do right now, Tom." She kept grinding. "I can't argue with what my mother says about me any more than I could argue with what the town says. Arguing just confirms that there's something to argue about." She looked at him. "What I can do is keep working. Keep being exactly what I am. And at some point the story and the evidence are going to be too far apart for people to hold both at once." Tom was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're either the most patient woman I've ever met, or the most stubborn one." "I've been told there isn't much difference," she said. He almost smiled. "No," he said. "I reckon there ain't." He left. She finished the coffee. She made breakfast. She got through the morning. But she thought about her mother's story all day, turning it under everything else, like a stone she couldn't quite step around. Because here was the thing that made it sharper than the town's gossip, sharper than Robert Hatch's voice in the feed store. Her mother knew her. Her mother had watched her get up at 4 o'clock every morning of her life and work without complaint and ask for nothing. Her mother had seen all of that and had decided that the narrative that protected Evelyn Bellamy was more valuable than the truth about Clara Bellamy. And her mother had told that story to enough people that it had taken root. That was not strangers deciding what she was. That was her family. She was still thinking about it that evening when the knock came at the front door. Tom answered it. She heard the creak of the porch boards, the low exchange of voices, and then Tom's footsteps coming to find her. He appeared in the kitchen doorway with an expression that she was developing enough fluency in to read as, "This is something." "Someone here for you," he said. "Your brother." She went very still. "Which one?" "The older one, James." James Bellamy was 22 and had their father's quiet disposition and their mother's practical intelligence. And he had spent most of his life being the family member who existed between the forces of Evelyn's authority and Clara's labor without fully aligning with either. He was standing on the front porch with his hat off and his coat done wrong at the buttons, the way he always buttoned his coat wrong and never noticed. And when she came to the door, he looked at her with the face of someone who has come to say something they are not sure will be received well. "James," she said. "Clara." He looked at the hat in his hands. "Can I come in?" She stepped aside. He came into the front room and stood there, and she stood across from him, and there was a long moment where neither of them said anything. "Mama's been talking," he said finally. "I know. I heard what she's been saying, about the trading post, about you." He looked up. "It ain't true, Clara. What she's saying. I was there when she made the plan. I heard her talking to Hatch about reaching Cross's foreman. You didn't engineer anything. She did." Clara held herself very still. "Why are you here, James?" "Because it's wrong." His voice was quiet, but entirely certain. "What she did at that trading post was wrong, and what she's saying now is wrong, and He stopped. "I didn't say anything then. When she was planning it. I didn't say a word, and I've thought about that every day since." He looked at her directly. "I'm sorry, Clara, for not saying anything." Something cracked in her chest at that. Very small, very specific. The place where her brother's silence had lived since the trading post morning. "You were there," she said quietly, "when she planned it." "Yes." "And you said nothing?" "No." He held her eyes. "I said nothing." The truth of it sat between them in the front room of Nathaniel Cross's house in the light of the lamp Tom had left burning on the side table. Clara thought about the morning at the trading post, the gray dawn, her mother's hands folded on the counter, Harlan Fitch suddenly fascinated by nails, and she added to that picture her brother somewhere in the Bellamy house knowing. "I'm not going to pretend that doesn't matter," she said, "because it does." I know. You knew what she was planning, and you said nothing, and I went to that trading post without knowing what I was walking into. I know, Clara. And now you're here because the story has gone further than you're comfortable with. He flinched. That's part of it, he admitted. I won't lie to you about that. But it's not all of it. I came because it's wrong. Because you're my sister. And because... He started again. Because Mama asked me to come. She wants you to come back. She says the winter is hard, and she needs help with Papa, and she thinks if you came back and explained yourself, things would be better. The silence that followed that sentence was very long. Explained myself, Clara said. Her words, not mine. She wants me to come back and explain myself. She said it again just to be sure she had heard it correctly. She arranged to trade me for flour, and then told everyone in the county that I engineered it, and now she wants me to come home and explain myself. James said nothing. His jaw moved. Go home, James, Clara said. Her voice was very quiet and very clear. Tell Mama that I have a position, and I intend to keep it. Tell her I am not angry. She paused, because she needed to be honest even now, even about this. Tell her I understand why she did what she did. I understand the winter was hard, and the debts were real, and she was afraid. I understand all of that. She stopped. But I will not explain myself. There is nothing in my conduct that requires explanation, and I will not go back to a house where I am expected to be grateful for the privilege of making myself small. James stood in the lamplight looking at his coat buttons. Tell her, Clara said, that I hope the winter is manageable, and that Papa has my love. She paused. And tell her that if she wants to stop telling a false story about me, I think that would be better for everyone. He put his hat back on, looked at her for a long moment. You look different, Clara, he said. Do I? Yeah. He seemed to be trying to find the right word for it and not quite getting there. You look like yourself, but like there's more of it. She thought about what Nathaniel had said weeks ago in the trading post. Is this what you want, or is this what everyone else decided for you? She thought about Billy's dough-kneading hands on the kitchen table, and Ada Clemence's notebook, and Tom Avery's carefully neutral face, saying the true kind. There is more of it, she said. Go home safe, James. He went. She stood on the porch and watched his horse take the road back toward town, and the night air was cold and clean and smelled of coming snow. And somewhere behind her, she heard the ranch going about its evening business. The horses, the cattle, the creak of the bunkhouse door. Tom's boots on the porch steps. You all right? Tom said from somewhere behind her. Yes, she said. And she was. Not easily, not without cost, but genuinely. The way bread comes out right when you've done the work. She had not explained herself. She had not gone small. She had stood in a doorway and said no to something, and meant it all the way down, and it had cost her something, and she had paid it without flinching, and that she understood now, standing in the cold, with the first suggestion of snow in the air, that was what choosing felt like. Not comfortable, not painless, just completely, solidly, irrevocably hers. She went back inside. She went back to the kitchen. She checked the bread that had been rising on the back shelf and found it exactly right, and she put it in the oven and sat down at the table with the lamp and the accounts and waited for morning to come, the way she always had. Except that now, the waiting felt different. It felt chosen. It felt like her own. The snow came the next day, 2 inches by noon, and more following, and the ranch turned inward, the way ranches do. In winter, tighter, more dependent on its own resources. The world outside growing quieter as the world inside grew more essential. She fed the men well. She kept the fire. She managed the stores with the systematic precision that Tom Avery had by now entirely stopped trying to second-guess. And Nathaniel Cross, who had heard the full account of James's visit from Tom before she had a chance to give it herself, because Tom Avery was as established an efficient communicator, came to her the following morning in the kitchen and said without any opening, I'm going to speak to your mother. Clara looked up from the butter churn. You absolutely are not. He stopped. Excuse me. You are not going to speak to my mother on my behalf. I am not a situation you manage, Nathaniel. I am a person who handled her own situation." She held his eyes. "I appreciate the impulse. I genuinely do. But if you ride to the Bellamy house and confront my mother, the only story anyone tells after that is the one where Nathaniel Cross rode to defend his whatever I am. And that story is not going to help either of us." He stood there in this kitchen doorway, looking at her with that expression she had been learning, the one that happened when she surprised him, when she said something he had not expected and was reassessing accordingly. "You're right," he said. "I know I'm right. You don't have to sound so certain about it." "I always sound certain," she said. "It saves time." Something broke through his usual composure. Then a real, unguarded thing, startlingly warm, and he laughed. Not politely. Actually laughed, brief and genuine, the way a man laughs when something catches him off guard, and he doesn't have time to stop it. It transformed his face completely, and she looked at it for one unguarded moment before she looked back down at the butter churn. "Clara," he said after a moment. "Yes." "What do you need? Not what I can fix. What do you need?" She thought about it honestly. "I need the work," she said. "And I need it to matter. And I need—" She paused. "I need someone to know the true version. Not act on it. Not fight about it. Just know it." He looked at her. "I know it," he said. The simplicity of it undid something in her that she had not been aware was wound so tight. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. He took his coffee and went out to the barn, and she worked the butter and thought about what it meant to be known, actually known, the true version, by someone who had no particular obligation to seek it out and had sought it anyway. She had spent her whole life managing the impressions of people who had already decided what she was. She had never once had someone simply say, "I know it," as though it were the most straightforward thing in the world, as though her truth were something worth knowing. The snow kept falling outside. The ranch kept its rhythms. The bread rose in the warmth of the oven, honest as always, requiring nothing but time and the right conditions, and someone willing to do the work. And Clara Bellamy, who had come here with nothing but her coat and her skills, and a stubborn refusal to lie all the way down, began slowly without announcing it. The way the most important things begin to understand that she was not waiting anymore. She was here. She had chosen it, and that she was starting to believe was the only foundation worth building anything on. The letter arrived on a Wednesday, tucked between a seed catalog and a bill from the lumber yard. And if Tom Avery hadn't handed the whole stack to Clara, along with the supply manifest, she might not have seen it until much later. But he did, and she stood in the kitchen with the letter in her hand and read her mother's handwriting on the outside. Clara Ruth Bellamy, care of Cross Ranch, and felt the particular cold that had nothing to do with December. She set it on the table and finished the bread first. She had learned over the course of her life that her mother's letters required a full stomach and settled hands. Evelyn Bellamy wrote the way she spoke, precisely with purpose, every word carrying more than its apparent weight. Clara had received exactly 4 letters from her mother in her entire life, and every one of them had contained a request shaped like a statement, a demand shaped like concern, and at least one sentence that would stay with her for years. She sat down when this bread was in the oven. She opened the letter. It was short. 3 paragraphs. Her mother did not waste paper. The first paragraph said that her father's health had worsened through November, and the doctor had been twice, which had cost money they did not have. The second paragraph said that James had relayed Clara's message, and that Evelyn respected her position, and that she hoped Clara was being careful about her reputation in that household. The third paragraph said that a man named Gerald Whitmore had been asking questions about the Cross Ranch landholdings, and that Evelyn thought Clara should know, as it seemed relevant to her current situation, that Whitmore had recently acquired the water rights to the creek that ran through the eastern edge of the Cross property, and that he intended to make use of that acquisition in the spring. Clara read the third paragraph twice. Then she folded the letter and sat with it in her hands and thought very carefully. Gerald Whitmore was not unknown in this county, though he operated with the particular invisibility of men whose primary business was conducted in land offices and bank meetings rather than in public. He was from back east originally. Kansas City. The rumor ran, though. Some said Chicago, and he had arrived in the county 3 years ago with money that nobody could quite account for, and a pattern of acquiring small properties and water rights that neighboring ranchers had begun to notice and not yet begun to resist. He had tried twice to purchase land directly from smaller operations that were struggling, and had been turned down both times, and had responded by acquiring things adjacent to those operations, instead the way water finds a round stone. She took the letter to Nathaniel that evening. He read it twice. He set it on his desk. He sat back in his chair with the expression she had come to recognize as the one he wore when something had confirmed a thing he had been hoping was not true. "You know about Whitmore," she said. "I know about the water rights," he said. "I didn't know he'd acquired them. I suspected he was moving on them." He looked at the letter. "I've had a low-grade disagreement with my eastern boundary for 4 years. The creek shifts in the spring, and the property line has never been cleanly resolved. I let it sit because the practical impact was minimal, and legal disputes in this county move slower than glaciers." He paused. Whitmore apparently did not let it sit. "How bad is it?" "Depends on what he intends to do with the rights." He stood up, moved to the window, stood there with his back question since she read the letter. "My mother," she said slowly, "talks to everyone. She's been talking to everyone in this county for months, partly about me, and partly because she's Evelyn Bellamy, and she collects information the way other women collect good china." She paused. "But she doesn't usually share what she knows unless she has a reason." "What reason does she have to share this with you?" "I don't know yet." She looked at the letter in his hand. "But I intend to find out." She rode to the Bellamy house the following morning without telling anyone where she was going until she told Tom to saddle the gray mare, and Tom looked at her face and saddled the gray mare without comment, which was one of the things she had come to value most about Tom Avery. Her mother was in the kitchen when Clara arrived. Evelyn Bellamy looked up from the stove with an expression that arranged itself into something that was not quite surprise. She had, Clara understood, been expecting this visit. She had written the letter precisely to produce it. "Clara," she said. "Mama." Clara closed the kitchen door behind her. She did not sit down. She had decided on the ride over that she would not sit down because sitting meant settling in, and she was not settling in. "Tell me what you know about Gerald Whitmore." Her mother turned back to the stove. "How is the ranch?" "Mama." "I thought you might want coffee." "Evelyn." She used her mother's given name deliberately, and her mother's spine went straight at it, and Clara held the ground. "Tell me what you know about Whitmore, and why you sent me that letter." A long pause. Her mother turned, set the spoon down, looked at her with the assessing gaze that Clara had grown up under, and Clara looked back steadily and did not flinch. And something in Evelyn Bellamy's expression shifted a small recalibration, the look of a woman adjusting to new information about a person she thought she knew. "He came here," her mother said. 2 weeks ago. Gerald Whitmore came to this house." Clara went still. "Why?" "I wanted to know about you." Her mother said it directly the way she occasionally said things when she had decided that directness served her better than the alternative. "He'd heard about the situation at the trading post. He knew you were at Cross Ranch. He asked a great many questions about the nature of your arrangement there and about Nathaniel Cross's habits and business dealings." "What did you tell him?" Her mother met her eyes. "Nothing useful," she said. "I told him you were a capable housekeeper and that Nathaniel Cross was a private man who kept his own counsel." She paused. "But Clara, the questions he was asking. He wasn't asking about you really. He was asking about the ranch, about the eastern boundary, about whether Cross had legal representation and how current his land filings were." She folded her hands on the table, and for just a moment she looked her age, which she rarely did. "He's not after you. But you're at that ranch, and that ranch is what he's after. And you decided to tell me." "I decided to tell you," her mother said, "because whatever else is between us, whatever you think of what I did, I am not going to sit here and let a man like Gerald Whitmore use information he pulled from my kitchen to damage something you're part of." She held Clara's gaze. "That's still mine to decide." Clara stood in her mother's kitchen and looked at the woman who had walked her to a trading post before sunrise and tried to trade her for flour, and who had told half the county a false story to protect herself, and who had just handed her information she didn't have to share, and she thought about how a person could hold all of those things simultaneously and still not be a simple story. "Thank you," Clara said, "for the letter." Her mother nodded, turned back to the stove. "Your father wants to see you," she said. "If you have a few minutes." She had a few minutes. She rode back to Cross Ranch with the gray mare, moving fast under a sky that was talking about more snow, and she went straight to Nathaniel's office and told him everything her mother had said, and she watched his face go through several things in quick succession before settling into the particular stillness of a man who has decided what needs to happen next. "He came to your mother's house," Nathaniel said. "Yes. He's been researching the property, the boundary question." He stood up. "I need to talk to Ed Greer." Ed Greer was the county land agent, a meticulous, quietly principled man who had held his position for 20 years and had the institutional memory of a land office going back to territorial days. He was also, Clara had gathered from various conversations, someone Nathaniel trusted in the limited way that Nathaniel trusted anyone outside his immediate operation. "I'll come with you," she said. He looked at her. "I know what questions to ask," she said. "I've been managing accounts and supply contracts for 3 months. I understand how documentation works. And—" she paused. "Whitmore asked my mother about me. Whatever he thinks I am at that ranch, he's already made me part of the picture. I'd rather be in the room than outside it." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached for his coat. "Then get your coat," he said. Ed Greer's office was small and absolutely filled with paper, organized paper that knew where it was supposed to be. Filing systems that had been built over 20 years into something that functioned like a second mind. Greer himself was a small, precise man in his mid-50s with reading spectacles and the unhurried manner of someone who understood that accuracy mattered more than speed. He looked up when they came in, looked at Clara with mild interest and no apparent judgment, and said, "Nathaniel, Miss Bellamy," which told her that her presence in the county had been noted in places she hadn't expected. "Ed," Nathaniel said, "I need to know the exact status of the eastern water rights on my property, all of them." Greer looked at him steadily. "Sit down," he said. What followed was 45 minutes of the kind of conversation that sounded dry on the surface and was underneath the driest form of terror Clara had encountered. Greer pulled files. He cross-referenced documents. He put papers side by side on his desk and traced boundaries with a careful finger and used language that was precise and consequential, and at several points produced a silence in Nathaniel Cross that Clara recognized as the silence of a man absorbing bad news without letting it show on his face. The Eastern water rights had been filed on 6 weeks ago. Whitmore had used an intermediary, a land acquisition firm from Kansas City that operated under a name that meant nothing locally, but that Greer recognized from 2 previous county transactions, both of which had resulted in neighboring properties losing access to resources they had used informally for years without formal documentation. "He's done this before," Clara said. 3 times that I'm aware of," Greer said. "Always the same method. Identify an informal usage water access road grazing easement that the primary property holder has never formally documented because it's been uncontested for years. Acquire the adjacent right. Then present the primary holder with a choice: buy the right back at his price or lose the usage." He set the papers down. "He's patient about it. He doesn't move immediately. He waits until the property is at a disadvantaged drought year bad cattle prices owner in difficult circumstances, and then he presents the option." "How long does he wait?" Nathaniel asked. "In the cases I know, between 4 and 8 months after acquisition." Greer looked at him. "You have time, but not unlimited time." "What are my options?" "You can challenge the acquisition, but the filing was technically correct. He found a genuine gap in your documentation. You can attempt to negotiate directly with Whitmore, but from what I've seen, he doesn't negotiate unless he has to." Greer paused. "Or you can close the documentation gap yourself permanently, which would limit what he can actually do with the rights he's acquired. It won't remove his acquisition, but it will significantly reduce its leverage." "How do I close the gap?" File a formal usage easement on the creek access. It requires witnesses to the historical use neighbors people who can testify that you've been using that water for your herd for the duration of your ownership. He looked at them both over his spectacles. You'd need at least 3. More is better. Nathaniel was quiet on the ride back. The kind of quiet that was not absence, but accumulation thoughts moving behind his eyes that he hadn't finished yet. Clara let it be. She had learned when to fill silence and when to let it do its own work. It was almost dark when he said, Ada Clements. Clara looked at him. Her husband's eastern pasture runs along my northern boundary. He's seen my herd at that creek every spring for 11 years. He paused. Dora Finch's husband, his access road runs past the eastern boundary. He's seen the water usage. Another pause. And Pete Darrow, whose son's leg I set, owns the property directly south. 3 witnesses, she said. 3 witnesses who know exactly what the documentation needs to say. He looked at her. You know Ada Clements. She came to the ranch for the soup methods, Clara said. We've spoken 3 times since. She brought Dora Finch last Thursday. Would she talk to her husband? I think, Clara said, that Ada Clements talks to her husband about anything she thinks he ought to know, and that her husband listens because he is apparently a man with reasonable self-preservation instincts. She paused. I'll talk to her. Clara, I'll talk to her, she said again firmly. You talk to Darrow. Tom can approach the Finch property. We don't need to make this into a campaign. We just need 3 people who know the truth to say it in writing. He looked at her with the expression she had come to recognize as the one that happened when she had gotten ahead of him, and he was deciding whether to be unsettled by it or relieved. He seemed to settle on the latter, which was becoming, she noted, his more frequent response. All right, he said. Ada Clements came the next day, which was Thursday, which was when Ada came. She arrived without her notebook this time, which meant she already knew the visit was not about soup, and she sat down at the kitchen table and listened to Clara explain the situation with the water rights and the documentation gap and the Kansas City land firm, and her expression moved through several phases before arriving at something that was unmistakably anger. Whitmore, Ada said. You know him. I know of him. Sam, my husband. Sam has been watching him for 2 years. He tried the same approach with our northern access road 18 months ago, and Sam caught it before he could file. She put both hands flat on this table. He's patient, and he's systematic, and he is very good at finding things that people haven't bothered to write down because they've never needed to. She looked at Clara. What do you need? A statement from Sam, witnessed and signed attesting to the creek usage on Cross Ranch's eastern pasture, historical and current. Sam's seen that herd at the creek every spring for over a decade, Ada said. He can write that statement in his sleep. She stood up. I'll have it to you by Friday, and I'll tell him to mention it to Pete Darrow when he sees him at the feed store. Pete's a thorough man. He'll want his statement to be comprehensive. She left with the purposeful stride of a woman who has found a problem that is within her capacity to solve and intends to solve it fully. Clara stood at the kitchen door and watched her go, and felt something she had not expected to feel about this situation: gratitude. Not the careful, watchful gratitude of someone who expects the kindness to come with conditions, but the clean, surprised gratitude of someone who has received help they did not know they were allowed to ask for. Tom came in from the yard. He looked at the empty porch. Ada Clements, he said. She'll have a statement from her husband by Friday, Clara said. Tom nodded. Pete Darrow's already agreed. Nathaniel talked to him this morning before you were up. Darrow said he'd write 3 pages if that's what it took, and knowing Darrow he might. And Finch. Dora Finch, Tom said with the carefully managed expression of a man who has strong opinions about someone he's only met a few times, told Nathaniel this morning that her husband would provide the statement, and furthermore that she personally intended to make sure Margaret Henderson understood the full situation with Whitmore, because Margaret Henderson's husband also has property near Whitmore's acquisitions, and apparently didn't know it. Clara looked at him. Dora Finch is going to tell Margaret Henderson. Dora Finch is going to tell Margaret Henderson, Tom confirmed. And from what I understand about how those two operate, that information will have moved through the entire County Women's Committee by Sunday. Clara sat down at the kitchen table. She thought about the woman who had looked at her in the general store with that particular assessing smile and said, "Well, you look settled." She thought about the county women's committee and the information that moved through it, and the way networks that people dismissed as social gossip were actually, when you looked at them straight, one of the most efficient information systems in any frontier community. "All right," she said. "All right." The statements came in by Friday. All three of them detailed and signed and witnessed with the care of people who understood that the precision of the language mattered. Ed Greer filed the easement on Monday morning, and Nathaniel Cross's Eastern water usage became a matter of formal record, and Gerald Whitmore's acquisition became legally significantly less useful than he had planned. Clara knew none of this had finished anything. Whitmore still held the rights. He could still cause difficulty. He was patient, Greer had said, and patient men did not abandon strategies because of the first obstacle. But the immediate threat was contained, and the county now knew something about Gerald Whitmore that it hadn't known before, and knowledge Clara had always believed was the thing that made the difference between a problem you saw coming and one that knocked you flat. What she had not expected was the town meeting. It was called by the County Agricultural Committee, a body that met 4 times a year to discuss shared concerns among ranching operations, and it was scheduled for the 3rd Tuesday in December at the Willow Creek Assembly Hall. It was a routine meeting. It was always a routine meeting. And then the week before it was scheduled, word moved through the county that Gerald Whitmore had requested time on the agenda. Tom brought her the news at breakfast. She brought it to Nathaniel at lunch. Nathaniel sat with it for approximately 10 seconds and then said, "I'm going." "So am I," she said. He looked at her. "He involved my mother," she said. "He researched me. He's been using everything adjacent to this ranch as a tool, and I am adjacent to this ranch." She held his gaze. "I'm going." A pause. "Clara, if you're in that room and Whitmore decides to use you, then he'll have made a mistake," she said. "Because he's been working from my mother's description of me, and my mother's description of me is a woman who makes herself small." She let that sit for a moment. "I haven't been that woman in some time." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once in the way that meant the conversation was settled. The Assembly Hall in Willow Creek held approximately 60 people comfortably, and had on this particular Tuesday evening approximately 80 in it. Clara had expected an audience. She had not expected to recognize, as she and Nathaniel came through the door, the faces of 3 women from the county committee: Ada Clements, Dora Finch, and a third woman she placed after a moment as Martha Darrow Pete's wife, sitting together in the 3rd row with the coordinated stillness of women who have discussed in advance where they are going to sit. Ada caught her eye and gave her a look that said, "We are here, and we are paying attention." Clara gave her a small nod and found a seat. Gerald Whitmore was already in the room. She saw him across at a man in his mid-40s, well-dressed for the county, with the groomed appearance and easy posture of someone accustomed to being the most prepared person in any room he entered. He was speaking to 2 men Clara didn't recognize, and he had not looked up when she and Nathaniel came in, though she noted with the observation of someone who had been watching people her whole life that his posture had shifted the moment they walked through the door. He knew they were there. He just wasn't going to show it. The meeting moved through its routine: cattle prices, shared fence, maintenance, the county road situation, with the slightly accelerated pace of a group of people who know there is something more significant coming and are managing their collective impatience. Then the committee chairman said, "We have a special request from Mr. Gerald Whitmore of Whitmore Land Partners. Mr. Whitmore." Whitmore stood. He was smooth. Clara gave him that. He was extremely smooth, the kind of man who had practiced the presentation of himself until it felt natural, who spoke in complete sentences with the measured cadence of someone who expected to be taken seriously, and usually was. He expressed with apparent sincerity his deep respect for the county's ranching community. He explained with apparent regret that he had found himself in the position of owning certain water rights adjacent to Cross Ranch that created an awkward situation for both parties, and that he hoped to resolve it in a spirit of neighborly cooperation. He proposed very reasonably a meeting between himself and Nathaniel Cross to discuss a mutually agreeable arrangement. I made it sound like a favor he was offering. He sat down to murmuring that was mixed and uncertain, the murmuring of a room that has heard something plausible and hasn't yet decided what to do with it. Then Nathaniel Cross stood up. He did not speak the way Whitmore spoke. He did not perform. He stood up at his full height, and he spoke in his normal voice and said, "I appreciate Mr. Whitmore's willingness to discuss this publicly. I'd like to add some context." He pulled the document from his coat and held it up briefly. The water rights Mr. Whitmore refers to were acquired 6 weeks ago through a Kansas City intermediary, without notification to my operation, targeting a documentation gap in my eastern boundary that had been uncontested for 15 years. The same method has been used previously in this county and in 2 neighboring counties. He set the document down. I filed a formal usage easement 3 weeks ago, witnessed by 3 neighboring property owners, that establishes my historical access to the creek. That easement is now on record. He looked directly at Whitmore. The awkward situation has been resolved, but I thought the county should know how the situation was created. The murmuring changed quality. Whitmore's expression did not change, which was itself a kind of tell a man whose face stays, that still is controlling it too carefully. He said pleasantly, "I appreciate Mr. Cross's transparency. I'd simply note that my firm operates entirely within legal boundaries and, Mr. Whitmore." The voice was Ada Clements from the 3rd row, and it was the voice of a woman who has been waiting for her moment and is entirely certain of it. My husband provided one of those witnessed statements. Before he did, he looked into your land firm's activities in Riley County and in Saline County over the past 3 years. Would you like to tell this room about the Henderson operation in Riley County? Or would you prefer I do it? Whitmore turned to look at her. The pleasant expression was still in place, but something had gone out of it. The Henderson family. Ada continued without waiting for his answer. Lost water access to a creek they'd used for 22 years because a land firm from Kansas City acquired the rights after a filing gap and then presented them with a purchase price they couldn't afford. They sold and left the county. She folded her hands in her lap. My husband corresponded with the Henderson eldest son last week. He was very forthcoming about the details. Dora Finch said from her seat beside Ada. My husband spoke to 2 operations in Saline County last Thursday. Martha Darrow said nothing. She simply took a notebook from her lap, opened it, and began to write, and the sound of a pen moving in the silence of the assembly hall was somehow louder than anything that had preceded it. Whitmore stood up. He was still smooth, Clara noted, still composed, still well-dressed, still the most prepared man in the room. But the room had shifted, and he knew it, and the knowledge was visible in the careful control of a man who is deciding in real time how much of his strategy can still be salvaged. "I understand there are concerns," he said. "I am of course willing to address any. Mr. Whitmore." This voice was Ed Greer's from the back of the room, and Greer's voice had the particular authority of a man who has filed every land document in this county for 20 years. "I'd recommend, given what's been said this evening, that before any further discussion, you ensure your firm's filings in this county are in complete compliance with the 1872 Territorial Water Rights Statute. There is a provision in that statute regarding acquired rights obtained through intermediary firms that has not been tested in this county's courts." He paused. "Yet." The word "yet" did the work that a longer speech could not have done. Whitmore looked at the room. The room looked back. And for just a moment, through the composed, prepared exterior of Gerald Whitmore, Clara saw something she recognized, the particular expression of a person realizing that the situation has moved past what they'd planned for. She had worn that expression herself once in a trading post, when her mother unfolded a plan that Clara hadn't known was coming. She did not feel sorry for him, but she understood the feeling. Whitmore sat down. He did not speak again for the remainder of the meeting, and when it ended, he left quickly before most people had risen from their seats, with his 2 associates behind him and his pleasantness intact, and his strategy, Clara suspected, already being revised. Outside the hall in the cold December air, Ada Clements fell into step beside her. "Well," Ada said. "Well," Clara agreed. "I want you to know," Ada said, "that was not only about Nathaniel Cross's water rights." "I know," Clara said. "It was about making sure that man understood this county knows how to read what he does." Ada looked straight ahead. We should have done it sooner, before the Hendersons. I felt guilty about that family for 2 years. Clara was quiet for a moment. You did it now, she said. That's not nothing. Ada gave her a look that was for Ada quite warm. No, she said. It's not nothing. She paused. You're good for this county, Clara Bellamy. I want you to know I think that. Clara looked at her. She did not have a quick answer for that which was unusual. She swallowed against something in her throat. Thank you, she said. I mean that. Ada nodded and went to find her husband, and Clara stood in the cold outside the Willow Creek Assembly Hall, and Nathaniel Cross appeared at her shoulder, and they stood for a moment side by side in the December air without speaking. Then he said quietly, You knew they'd be there, Ada and Dora. I hoped, she said. I didn't know. You talked to Ada last Thursday. I mentioned the meeting. I mentioned what Whitmore had done. I didn't ask her to come. She paused. I didn't need to. I was quiet for a moment. You built that, he said. Those connections, the soup, Thursdays, Ada's notebook, Dora's committee. You built it, and you didn't even know you were building it. She thought about that. About 3 months of bread and Billy's Missouri stories, and Ada's efficient questions, and Dora's particular brand of organized indignation, and Tom's coffee cup conversations, and the slow, unremarkable accumulation of people who had seen who she was and decided it was worth knowing. I was just doing the work, she said. Clara. He turned to look at her, and the December cold was around them, and the lamp from the assembly hall door was behind him, and his face was entirely unguarded, in a way she had only seen a handful of times in the kitchen before dawn, in the lamplight, in the brief, uncontrolled moment when he had laughed. That's not all you were doing. She looked at him. He looked at her. And the space between them, which had been managed and professional and carefully maintained for 3 months, was suddenly and quietly something else. Not dramatic, not announced. Just change the way things change when you have been honest with someone for long enough that the honesty becomes its own kind of closeness. She said because she had promised herself a long time ago that she would not be the person who looked away, I know. He nodded, said nothing more, but he did not look away either. They walked back to the wagon in the cold, and Sampson was where they'd left him, patient and editorial, and she climbed up to the bench without assistance, the same way she always had, and he gathered the reins and clicked the horse into motion, and they drove back toward Cross Ranch under a sky that had finally committed to stars instead of snow. Neither of them spoke much on the drive home. Neither of them needed to, but something had been said, something had been heard, and in the economy of 2 people who had both learned to live with more silence than was strictly comfortable, that was already a great deal. That was in fact the kind of beginning that does not announce itself as a beginning at all. It just is one quietly and completely, by the time you notice it. And Clara Bellamy, who had arrived at this ranch with nothing, and had built without fully intending to something she could not have named. 3 months ago sat in the cold wagon under the Kansas stars, and let herself feel without examining it too carefully the solid and surprising warmth of a life that was becoming unmistakably her own. January came in like a verdict. The cold settled over Cross Ranch with the particular authority of a Kansas winter that has decided it means business and the work contracted inward, the way all ranch work did in the deep months, closer, harder, more dependent on the people inside it than the land around it. Clara had been at the ranch for 4 months now. 4 months of bread and accounts and Thursday soup sessions and county assembly halls and conversations in lamplight that had been slowly, without either of them naming it, becoming something more than professional courtesy. She noticed it in small things first. The way he saved the interesting parts of the weekly newspaper to read aloud at supper, not to the table generally, but positioned toward her specifically. The way he had started leaving his coffee cup on the kitchen window sill instead of taking it back to the office, which she had come to understand was his way of staying in the room without appearing to linger. The way 3 weeks after the assembly hall, and that moment in the December air, he had asked her what she thought about the spring cattle plan, not as a courtesy, not as a formality, but with the genuine attention of a man who expected her answer to be useful. She noticed it. She did not say anything about it. She was not sure yet what there was to say, and she had learned over the course of her life that the things worth saying were usually worth waiting until she was sure. What she was sure of was the bread. She was sure of the accounts which she had been keeping for 4 months, and which had quietly begun to show the ranch's financial picture more clearly than it had been shown before. She was sure of the Thursday sessions, which had grown from Ada's visits to a loose rotation of 6 ranch wives, who came and went and shared information with the pragmatic efficiency of women who understood that the fastest way to solve a problem was to pool what you knew. She was sure also that something was coming. She could not have named it, but she had spent her whole life in close proximity to people managing difficult situations, and she had developed an instinct for the particular quality of stillness that preceded something breaking open. It broke open on a Friday in the middle of January, when Tom Avery came in from a supply run with a face she had never seen on him before. Not the carefully neutral face of a man managing his reactions, but the face of a man who has not yet decided how to manage them, because what he is carrying is genuinely too heavy for a single expression. She set down the bread knife. Tom. He sat down. He did not take off his coat. He put both hands flat on the table and looked at them for a moment. Robert Hatch's eldest boy came through town on his way from Abilene this morning, he said. He'd heard something there. He told Hatch. Hatch told it to 3 people at the feed store before noon. He looked up. Whitmore's been in Abilene for 2 weeks. He went there after the assembly meeting. He's been meeting with a lawyer from Kansas City and a bank representative and 2 men that nobody in Abilene recognized. Clara was very still. About what? About the Cross Ranch property, Tom said. The eastern boundary isn't the only filing gap. Hatch's boy said there are 3 other documentation issues that Whitmore's firm has identified. Survey records from the original territorial filing that don't match the current fence lines. An access easement on the southern road that was never formally transferred when the previous owner sold to Nathaniel 12 years ago. He paused. And a question about the original deed itself. Something about the way it was registered in the territorial period. Something that Whitmore's Kansas City lawyer apparently thinks could be challenged in a county court. She sat down. He's not going after the water rights, Tom said. He never cared about the water rights. That was to see how fast Nathaniel moved, to see what his resources were, to see who he'd call on. His voice was steady but barely. The water rights were a test. The real target is the deed. She sat in the kitchen with Tom Avery and listened to the sound of the ranch outside going about its ordinary Friday work, and she thought about Gerald Whitmore sitting in an Abilene office 2 weeks ago, smooth and patient, and already 3 moves ahead. And she thought about the assembly hall and Ada Clemence's notebook and Ed Greer's careful voice saying yet, and she understood with the cold clarity of someone who has just seen the full shape of a problem that they had won a battle that was not the war. "Where is Nathaniel?" she said. "North pasture. He doesn't know yet." She stood up. "Get him." Tom went. She had the coffee on, and the table clear, and the things she needed to say organized in her mind. Not rehearsed, because rehearsal made her wooden, but thought through the way she thought through a new recipe, understanding the components before she touched anything, by the time she heard Nathaniel's boots on the back step. He came in and looked at her face and said, "What happened?" She told him. All of it. Plainly. She watched his face move through the same things hers had: the initial stillness, the recalculation, the particular quality of anger that a controlled man experiences as a deepening quiet rather than a rise in volume. When she was done, he sat down at the table and said nothing for a full minute. Then he said, "The deed." Yes, it was a territorial filing. 1861. The territory became a state in 1861. The registration happened in a 6-month window when the filing procedures were... He stopped. There are probably irregularities. There were irregularities in half the filings from that period. Nobody has challenged them because the land has been in continuous use and the chains of ownership have been clear. Until someone decides to challenge them, Clara said. Until someone decides to challenge them. His voice was entirely flat. And has a Kansas City lawyer who knows which irregularities a territorial-era county court can be persuaded to take seriously. She looked at him. Can he win? A pause that was too long. I don't know, he said. I honestly don't know. If he files a challenge, it goes to county court. County court will look at the filing and find the irregularities, and will have to decide whether they're significant enough to matter. They may not be. They probably aren't. He pressed his hand flat on the table. But a court challenge that runs for 6 months or a year costs money and produces uncertainty and makes the ranch functionally unmortgageable and possibly unsaleable, and all of that happens regardless of whether he wins. He doesn't need to win, Clara said. He doesn't need to win. He agreed. He needs me to be in enough trouble that selling to him becomes the better option. The kitchen was quiet. Billy appeared in the doorway, took one look at the room, and quietly reversed direction without saying anything. Tom remained on the porch. Even the ranch outside seemed to have gone slightly more still, the way animals go still when they sense something in the air. We need a lawyer, Clara said. I know. Not a county lawyer. Someone who knows territorial deed law. Someone who has handled this kind of challenge before. I know, Clara. Ed Greer will know who. She was already up, already moving. He's seen every deed filing in this county for 20 years. He'll know which lawyers in the state have dealt with territorial-era challenges. Clara. His voice stopped her. She turned. He was looking at her with the expression she had come to know as the one that meant he was about to say something that cost him something to say. This could go badly. I want you to understand that. Whatever happens in the next months, this could go badly. For the ranch. She looked at him steadily. I know that. If the ranch goes... He stopped. Your position here would be Nathaniel. She said his name the way you say something when you need a person to hear exactly one thing and not build a story around it. I know what could happen. I'm not asking you to protect me from the information. I'm standing in your kitchen at... She glanced at the stove clock. 2:30 on a Friday afternoon, and I'm telling you we need Ed Greer, and we need a lawyer, and we need to move before Whitmore files anything. She held his gaze. That's the conversation I'm having. The other conversation can wait. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then something in him settled, the particular settling of a man who has been carrying something alone for long enough that being not alone with it is almost disorienting. All right, he said. Let's go see Ed Greer. Greer was still in his office when they arrived, and he listened to everything with the focused stillness of a man filing it as it arrived. And when Nathaniel was done, Greer sat back and pressed his fingertips together and looked at the ceiling for approximately 10 seconds. Daniel Holt, he said. Who is he? Nathaniel said. He's a lawyer in Topeka. Spent 15 years in the Territorial Land Office before he went into private practice. He's handled 4 deed challenges from the territorial filing period in the last decade and won 3 of them. Greer lowered his gaze from the ceiling. He's expensive. How expensive? More than you'd want. A pause. Less than losing the ranch. Nathaniel nodded once. Can you reach him? I can send a wire today. If he takes the case, he'll want to come and examine the original filings himself. That'll be next week at the earliest. Greer looked at him steadily. Nathaniel, the irregularities in your deed are real. I've known about them for years. I didn't flag them because they've never mattered, and there's nothing in my mandate that requires me to go looking for trouble in clean operations. His voice was as close to apologetic as a land agent's voice could get. I should perhaps have mentioned them. I didn't. Nathaniel looked at him. You couldn't have known someone would use them. No, Greer said. But I should have told you they existed. He stood. I'll send the wire to Holt now. Outside the land office in the cold Willow Creek Street, Clara said. We need to tell Ada. Nathaniel looked at her. She and Dora have been tracking Whitmore. They have contacts in Riley and Saline counties. If Whitmore's lawyer has done this kind of challenge before, Ada's network may know where and how. She paused. Information is what moves faster than a legal filing, Nathaniel. If we know his full history before he files, we can give Holt something to work with. Howe was quiet for a moment. She could see him adjusting the way he adjusted when she got ahead of him, not resisting it, but processing it. You've been thinking about this since Tom told you, he said. I've been thinking about this since the assembly hall, she said. I just didn't know which direction it was going to come from. He looked at her for a long moment, and in his face was something she had been watching gather for months. Something that was past respect and past admiration, and was in the territory of something she had no armor for, because no one had ever directed it at her before. Something that was simply and entirely the look of a man who has found the person he did not know he was looking for. She looked back at him and did not look away. "Clara," he said. "Don't," she said. "Not yet. Not in the middle of this." A pause. "Why not in the middle of this?" "Because I want to be sure that whatever you're going to say, you're saying it because it's true, and not because things are difficult and you're—" She stopped. Found the honest words. "I've spent my whole life having people decide what I was worth based on what they needed at the time. I need to know the difference." I was quiet for long enough that the cold made itself notice the January air moving between them. Then he said, "That's fair." "Thank you," she said. "I'll still say it," he said. "When you'll let me." She looked at him. "I know," she said. They went back to the ranch. She wrote to Ada that evening explaining what Tom had heard in Abilene, asking specifically whether Ada or Dora had information about Whitmore's legal history in other counties. She wrote the letter in the kitchen by lamplight. After the men had gone to their bunks, and she wrote it carefully because she knew it was going to matter. Ada's response came by return rider on Monday morning, which meant Ada had ridden to town Sunday evening to send it, which meant Ada had understood the urgency with an efficiency that was at this point unsurprising. The letter was 3 pages. Clara read it at the kitchen table before anyone else was up, with her coffee and the lamp and the particular silence of very early morning that she had come to think of as her own private time. Gerald Whitmore's land firm had attempted deed challenges in 2 previous counties. In Saline County, the challenge had been dropped before it reached court. The property owner had sold rather than fight. In Riley County, a challenge had proceeded to county court and had been dismissed, but the judge's ruling had noted a procedural flaw in the challenge method that Whitmore's lawyers had not anticipated. Ada had the name of the Riley County judge. She had the name of the lawyer who had beaten the challenge. She had somehow, through the network that Clara had come to understand, was Ada Clemence's primary and most formidable resource. The actual court filing from the Riley County case, copied by hand, by someone Ada described only as a person with access to the records. At the bottom of the letter, in Ada's careful, efficient handwriting, "I suggest you give all of this to Holt before he comes to town. It will save him time and give Whitmore considerably less of it." Clara sat with the letter for a moment. Then she put it in the envelope with Ed Greer's name on it, and a note asking him to wire the relevant information to Daniel Holt in Topeka before the lawyer arrived. She had the bread on before 5 o'clock. She had Tom on his way to Ed Greer's office by 6. She had told Nathaniel about Ada's letter over coffee at 6:30, watching his face move through something that was past relief and into a quieter, more permanent kind of gratitude. "Ada Clemence," he said. "Ada Clemence," she agreed. "And you," he said. "And me," she said. Daniel Holt arrived on Wednesday and was in Clara's assessment within the first 10 minutes of meeting him, exactly what Ed Greer had described: thorough, unhurried, and possessed of a legal mind that moved like a well-maintained clock, each part engaging the next with precise and purposeful action. He examined the original deed filing. He read the court documents from Riley County. He spoke to Ed Greer for 2 hours. He came back to the ranch that evening and sat at the kitchen table and told them what he thought. "The irregularities are real," he said. "They exist because territorial-era filing procedures changed 6 times in 18 months, and the clerical staff implementing them didn't always know which version was current. The irregularity in your deed is shared by approximately 40% of the original filings from that period." He looked at Nathaniel. "Whitmore's lawyers know this. What they're counting on is that a county judge will look at the text of the filing and find the technical defect before they look at the historical context that explains it." "Can you prevent that?" Nathaniel said. "I can make it very difficult." Holt picked up the Riley County filing. This case established that challenges to territorial era deeds require the challenger to demonstrate not only the technical defect, but also a clear injury, that the defect has created an actual dispute about ownership, rather than simply a paperwork irregularity. He set it down. Your deed has an irregularity. Whitmore's firm will argue that the irregularity creates uncertainty about ownership. I will argue that 15 years of uncontested continuous operation establishes ownership regardless of the paperwork. He paused. What I need is documentation of that continuous operation. Records, accounts, supply contracts. Anything that establishes that this ranch has been operating as Nathaniel Cross's property since the original filing. He looked at Clara. Miss Bellamy, he said, I understand you've been keeping the ranch accounts. For 4 months, she said. And prior records. I've been working through the prior years as well, she said. Organizing what was kept. It's incomplete, but there's material going back 6 years. She paused. What specifically do you need? Everything, he said. Organized by year. Supplier names, amounts, contracts if they exist. Wage records if they were kept. Any correspondence with neighboring property owners that references the ranch's operation. He looked at her steadily. This is going to be the backbone of our case. The legal argument is strong, but the documentation is what makes it irrefutable. Clara looked at the accounts ledger she had been keeping for 4 months, and at the older, less organized records she had been quietly working through in her spare evenings, and she said, How long do I have? Holt expects Whitmore will file the challenge within 3 weeks, Holt said. Once he files, we have 30 days to respond. I'll have it in 2 weeks, she said. Holt looked at her for a moment, with the appraising attention of a very good lawyer, recognizing a very good accountant. All right, he said. She worked. She had always worked, but this was different. This was work with stakes. She could see clearly. Work where the gap between doing it well and doing it adequately was the difference between a man keeping the land he had built his life on and losing it to a patient man from Kansas City who had calculated the odds and decided they favored him. She organized 12 years of records into a sequential account of continuous, consistent ranch operation. She cross-referenced supplier records with land use. She found correspondence in a box in the office that had never been properly filed, that included letters between Nathaniel and neighboring property owners that referenced the boundaries of the Cross Ranch explicitly, and in ways that established long-term mutual recognition of those boundaries. She labeled everything. She wrote a summary document in clear language that a county judge who was not a rancher could understand. She worked in the evenings after supper. She worked on Saturday mornings when the routine was lighter. She worked on a Sunday afternoon when the snow kept everyone inside and the house was quiet, and Billy appeared at the office door with a cup of coffee and set it on the desk without being asked and said, "Looking good, ma'am," and left without further comment, which was from Billy a significant expression of support. Nathaniel came to the office most evenings. He did not always speak. Sometimes he brought his own work and sat on the other side of the desk, and they worked in parallel, the lamp between them, the ranch quiet around them, and those evenings had a quality she did not have a word for, but would have recognized if someone had named it for her, the quality of two people who have stopped pretending they are merely in the same room and started being simply together. On the 11th evening, he set down his papers and said, "Can I say it now?" She looked up from the accounts. "We're not in the middle of a crisis," he said. "Not actively. The filing hasn't come yet. The work is nearly done, and I have held this for 3 weeks, and I am not a patient man about most things, but I have been patient about this because you asked me to be, and I would like to not be patient about it anymore." She set her pen down. "Say it," she said. He looked at her across the desk in the lamplight, and his face was entirely without the controlled management she had spent 4 months learning to read behind. It was just his face, just him. "I am not going to tell you I need you here," he said. "I don't operate that way. I've told you that from the beginning. I want people who choose to be here, not people who are here because they have no better option." He paused. "But I want you here. Specifically you for every reason I know about, and probably for some I haven't named yet. And I think you know that. I think you've known it for a while. And I think you—" He stopped. "Tell me if I'm wrong." She sat with it for a moment. She thought about the trading post and the wagon and the bread and the door with a latch on the inside and Billy's Missouri stories and Ada's notebook and the assembly hall and the December cold and the thing she had felt in the space between them that she had not yet let herself hold directly. "You're not wrong," she said. He nodded slowly. "Then when this is settled?" "When this is settled," she said. "I'd like to have a different conversation," he said. "I know," she said. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. He picked up his papers. She picked up her pen. They went back to work. But the room was different now. The lamp was the same. The snow was the same outside. The accounts were the same under her hands. But the room was different in the way rooms are different. Once something honest has been said in them, not dramatic, not changed entirely, just truer than it had been before. Just finally itself. Whitmore filed the challenge on a Thursday morning 23 days after Holt's arrival. Ed Greer sent word to the ranch by midday. Nathaniel read the notice and handed it to Clara without comment, and she read it and handed it to Holt, who had been staying at the Willow Creek boarding house for 2 weeks in anticipation. Holt read it, set it down. "Good," he said, which was not the response she had expected. "Good," she said. "He filed it the way I expected him to file it. Same argument structure as the Riley County challenge. He's using the same playbook because it almost worked once, and he thinks the Riley ruling was an anomaly." Holt looked at the document. "It wasn't an anomaly. It was a correct reading of the statute. And I have the summary you prepared, 12 years of continuous operation documentation and a precedent from this state's own court records." He looked at Clara. "Your documentation is exceptional, Miss Bellamy. Thorough, clear, organized in exactly the way a county judge needs to see it. This case does not go to court on paper alone, it goes on the strength of what that paper demonstrates." He paused. "This is going to hold." Clara looked at the filing in Holt's hand. She looked at the 12 years of records she had organized and cross-referenced and summarized, stacked on the desk beside the law books Holt had brought from Topeka. She looked at Nathaniel, standing in the office doorway, with his arms crossed and his face wearing the stillness of a man who has been afraid of something for weeks, and has just been told by a man he respects that the fear was worth having, but the outcome is not what he feared. "Good," she said, and meant it all the way down. The county court date was set for the second week of February. Holt returned to Topeka to prepare the formal response and said he would be back a week before the hearing. Tom Avery received this information with the expression of a man whose opinion of lawyers had just moved slightly in a positive direction, which for Tom was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Ada Clements came on Thursday as she always did, and brought Dora Finch, and they sat in the kitchen with coffee and listened to Clara's account of the filing and Holt's response, and Ada took notes with her usual efficiency, and Dora said, "Good," in the same tone Clara had used, which Clara recognized as the highest form of solidarity available between women of a certain practical disposition. "He'll come after you too," Dora said, setting her cup down. "Not legally. He can't, you're not on the deed. But he'll go after the story again. He'll try to use you to make Nathaniel look vulnerable the way he tried before the assembly meeting." Clara looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Dora said with the directness of a woman who has spent 30 years on a frontier ranch and has no patience for indirection. "When something important needs saying, that a single man running a property in a legal dispute with a woman of uncertain standing. Living on his ranch is easier for a county judge to look sideways at than a man with a clear and respectable household." She folded her hands. "It's not fair. It's also true. And Whitmore's lawyer will know it." The kitchen was quiet. Clara felt the thing Dora was saying settle over her with the particular weight of a truth she had been circling without looking at directly. Her presence at Cross Ranch had been managed. It had been explained and established and defended over 4 months through her work and her conduct and the network of women who had decided she was worth knowing. But managed was not the same as resolved. And in a county court with a Kansas City lawyer looking for leverage, managed might not be enough. "What are you suggesting?" she said. Dora looked at her with the steady gaze of someone who has thought this through. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you what Whitmore's lawyer will look for. What you do with that information is your business." She paused. "And Nathaniel's." Ada was looking at her notebook with the careful attention of a woman who is very deliberately not making eye contact. That evening after supper, after the hands had gone to the bunkhouse, and Tom had taken his coffee to the porch, Clara sat down across from Nathaniel at the kitchen table and said, "Dora said something today." He looked at her. She told him. Plainly, the way she always told him things, the truth of it, without softening the edges, because she had promised herself when she came to this ranch that she would not manage the truth of things for the people around her. She told him what Dora had said about the county court and the lawyer and the story Whitmore could construct around her presence. When she was done, Nathaniel Cross was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the fire settled in the grate. Long enough that the night outside had fully arrived. Then he said, "I told you I wanted to have a different conversation when this was settled." "Yes," she said. "I'd like to have it now," he said. "If you'll let me." She looked at him. At the face she had been learning for 4 months, the lines at the corners of his eyes, the careful strength of him, the rare and genuine things that moved through his expression when he stopped managing it. The man who had asked her in a trading post at dawn what she wanted. The man who had said, "I know it," as though her truth were something worth knowing. She thought about what it meant to choose. Not to be left with no option, not to take the thing that was better than the alternative, but to look at something clearly, with full knowledge of what it was and what it cost, and decide that you wanted it. She thought about what Dora had said. She thought about the county court and Gerald Whitmore's lawyer and the story they might construct. She thought about the fact that none of those things were why she was sitting here, looking at this man, feeling exactly what she was feeling. "Say it," she said. "Whatever you were going to say when this was settled, say it now." He leaned forward, both hands on the table, and he looked at her with the unmanaged, uncontrolled, entirely real face of a man who has decided to say the honest thing regardless of how it lands. "Clara Bellamy," he said, "I am not asking you because of any court case. I am not asking you because of what it looks like, or what a lawyer might say, or what the county might think. I am asking you because I have watched you for 4 months be exactly and entirely yourself in my house and in my kitchen and in my county and in my life, and it has been—" He stopped, found the word. "It has been the best 4 months I have known in a long time, and I would like, if you are willing, for it to not be 4 months, but a great deal longer than that." The lamp was between them. The fire was behind her. The ranch was quiet around them. She looked at him for a long moment, and she held the full weight of it. The trading post, and the bread, and the flour sack price her mother had put on her, and the 25 years of being too much and not enough, and the 4 months of being exactly the size she was, and finding that was not just acceptable, but wanted genuinely, and specifically wanted by this man across this table. She thought about her mother's voice saying, "No one has come for you." She thought about the door with a latch on the inside. She thought about what choosing felt like. "Yes," she said. "I'm willing." He reached across the table. His hand covered hers, large and warm and entirely certain, and she turned her hand over and held it back. And they sat in the kitchen in the lamplight with the Kansas winter outside, and 12 years of ranch records on the desk next door, and a county court date 2 weeks away, and it was not a story anyone would have written for them. Not the trading post, not the flour sack price, not the town's versions, or her mother's versions, or Whitmore's version. It was just theirs, plain and solid and chosen. Tom Avery appeared briefly in the kitchen doorway, assessed the situation with approximately 1.5 seconds of observation, said "good," in the precise tone of a man delivering a verdict he has held for some time, and went back to the porch. Clara looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at Clara. And despite everything, the court case and the lawyer and the filing and Whitmore's patience and the Kansas cold and the 4 months of careful managed distance, she laughed. Not politely. Actually laughed, brief and genuine and surprised out of her, the way a person laughs when something lands exactly right. He smiled. The real one, the unguarded one, she had only seen a handful of times. It transformed his face completely. And in the kitchen of Cross Ranch on a January evening with snow on the ground and a court date on the calendar and 2 weeks of hard work still ahead of them. Something settled into place between Clara Bellamy and Nathaniel Cross that had been finding its way there for 4 months. Something that had been decided. Something that was finally and completely theirs. The morning of the county court hearing, Clara was up at 4 o'clock. Not because she had to be. The hearing wasn't until 10. Holt had told them to arrive by 9:30, and the drive to the Willow Creek Courthouse was 40 minutes at a reasonable pace. She had time. She had more than enough time. But she was up at 4, because she had always been up at 4, because 4 o'clock was the hour that belonged to her alone. The hour before the house woke up and the world had opinions, and she needed it today more than she had needed it in a long time. She made the bread. She made it the way she always made it, carefully, with both hands pressing her full weight into the rhythm of it. She had learned in the months since she had come to Cross Ranch that the bread was not just bread. It was the thing she did when she needed to remember who she was. When the town talked, she made bread. When her mother's letter came, she made bread. When Whitmore filed his challenge, and the fear of it sat in the kitchen like a cold she couldn't shake, she made bread. It had never failed her. It was the most honest thing she knew how to do, and this morning she needed honesty the way she needed air. Nathaniel found her at 5:30, the way he had been finding her for months now, drawn to the kitchen by the smell of something real being made. He poured coffee without being asked. He had learned her kitchen so thoroughly by now that he moved in it like it was his own, which it was, but also somehow like it was hers, which it also was, and she had stopped trying to parse that particular overlap some time ago. He sat down across from her and watched her shape the loaves and said nothing, because he had learned when silence was the right thing to offer, and this morning it was. She was the one who broke it. "I'm not afraid of the hearing," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm afraid of what it means if things go wrong." She set the loaves to rise, wiped her hands on her apron. "Not for me, for you." He looked at her steadily. "Let me be afraid of that," he said. "That's mine to carry. We're past the point where things are only yours to carry," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved. "Yes," he said. "I reckon we are." She sat down across from him with her own coffee, and they sat in the kitchen in the dark before dawn, and the ranch was quiet around them, and she thought about everything that had happened in this kitchen. The 4 in the morning silences, the conversations that had started as professional and become something else entirely. The bread that had been present for all of it, like a witness. She thought about a girl who had stood in a trading post with bread dough on her hands and no idea what was about to happen to her life. She thought about what choosing felt like. "Whatever happens today," she said, "I need you to know something." "Tell me," he said. "I came to this ranch with nothing," she said. "I told myself it was a job, and I was going to do it well, and that was all it was going to be. And I believed that. For about 2 weeks." She looked at him across the table. "I have not regretted a single day of being here. Not the hard ones. Not the ones where the town talked, and my mother's story was everywhere, and I had to decide again whether I was going to be the woman everyone expected or the woman I actually was." She paused. "Not one day." He put his hand over hers on the table. Not a new gesture, he had been making it for 2 weeks since the evening in the office, but it still landed the same way it had the first time. Completely. Without equivocation. "Not one day," he said back to her, like an answer to something she hadn't asked. The courthouse was a 2-story building that smelled of old paper and wood polish, and the specific institutional seriousness of a place where decisions were made that people had to live with afterward. Clara had been inside it exactly once before as a child, when her father had some business with the land records that she hadn't understood and hadn't been explained to her. She remembered thinking it felt like a place that expected you to be smaller than you were. She walked in beside Nathaniel and did not make herself smaller. Holt was already there at the plaintiff's table with his Topeka briefcase, and the organized, systematic stillness of a man who has prepared so thoroughly that the preparation has become calm. He looked up when they came in and gave a nod that was professional and carried inside it something that was, she thought, confidence, not performed confidence, but the genuine article, the kind that comes from knowing your material. Whitmore was already there too. Across the room with his Kansas City lawyer, a tall man named Prescott, who had the groomed, expensive appearance of someone who charged accordingly and delivered on it. Whitmore looked up when Nathaniel and Clara entered, and something crossed his face, not quite surprise, but a reassessment. He had been expecting, she thought, to see Nathaniel cross alone, or with his lawyer. He had not been expecting her. She held Whitmore's gaze for exactly long enough to make the point, And then she turned away and sat down beside Nathaniel, and did not look at Whitmore again. The gallery, which she had not fully anticipated, was not empty. Ada Clements was in the third row, Dora Finch beside her, Martha Darrow behind them, Tom Avery at the end of the row, hat in his hands, sitting with the particular upright stillness of a man who has decided this is important enough to be on his best behavior for. Billy at the far end of the bench, looking terrified and determined in equal measure, and wearing what appeared to be his only good shirt. Pete and Jed were there. Pete, who had never in 4 months said more than 12 consecutive words to her, had put on a clean coat. Ed Greer was in the back row with his reading spectacles, and a folder that she suspected contained documents she didn't know about yet. And behind Ed Greer, in the last row, wearing a coat that Clara recognized, and a hat she had seen 1,000 times in her own memory, her brother James. Sitting straight, eyes forward. There because he had decided to be there, which cost him something she understood without needing it explained. She faced front. Her throat was tight. She faced front. Judge Aldous Harder was a man in his 60s, with the deliberate, unhurried manner of someone who had been making decisions people didn't like for 30 years and had made peace with that aspect of the work. He read the filing. He read Holt's response. He looked at the documentation package, 12 years of organized ranch records. Clara's summary. The neighbor statements. The Riley County precedent, with the careful attention of a man who does not like to be surprised by information he should have had at the outset. Prescott spoke first for Whitmore. He was good. Clara admitted that without difficulty. He built the argument with the clean efficiency of someone who had assembled it before and knew which joints held the technical defect in the territorial filing. The language of the 1861 registration statute. The argument that documentation irregularities created genuine uncertainty about ownership that a court was obligated to resolve. He was 30 minutes. He was thorough. He was composed. Then Holt stood up. Holt was 45 minutes. He was methodical in the way that a man who has spent 15 years in a land office is methodical, not theatrical, not performing, just building with the precise, systematic patience of someone who believes that if you put the truth in the right order, it speaks for itself. He presented the Riley County precedent. He presented the continuous operation documentation. He presented the neighbor statements. Sam Clements, Calvin Finch, Pete Darrow, attesting to 12 and more years of recognized uncontested usage. He presented Clara's 12-year account summary, which he described to Judge Harder as the most thorough documentation of continuous ranch operation he had encountered in 15 years of territorial deed work. He presented at the end a single additional document that Ed Greer had produced from the Land Office archives 2 days ago, and that Clara had not seen before. It was a survey correspondence from 1863, 2 years after the original deed filing, in which the territorial surveyor had explicitly noted and explained the filing irregularity in a letter to the land registry, describing it as a procedural artifact of the transition period, and confirming that the underlying ownership was clear and unambiguous. The letter had been in the archives for 60 years. It had never needed to be retrieved before. Ed Greer. Clara understood had gone looking for it after the challenge was filed. Ed Greer, who had told Nathaniel he should perhaps have mentioned the irregularities sooner, had spent 2 weeks in his own archives making it right. Prescott's composure. When Holt submitted the 1863 letter was admirable, but the quality of the silence that followed it, that brief controlled stillness from Whitmore's table, told Clara everything about whether Prescott had known that document existed. I hadn't. Judge Harder studied the letter for a long time. Then he looked up and said in the voice of a man who has reached a conclusion and intends to state it without ceremony, "Mr. Prescott, I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond to this correspondence. I'll also tell you directly that a 1863 territorial surveyor's notation, explicitly clarifying the filing in question, is going to weigh very heavily in this court's assessment of whether the irregularity your client has identified constitutes a genuine ownership dispute or a paperwork artifact of an administrative transition period." He set the letter down. Take 20 minutes. Prescott took 18. He came back with a response that was professionally constructed and fundamentally insufficient. And Clara could hear the insufficiency in it. Even without being a lawyer, could hear the place where an argument that had been built on one version of the facts was trying to accommodate a different version and failing to fully do it. Judge Harder listened. He made notes. He asked 3 questions all directed at Holt, all of which Holt answered with the calm precision of a man standing on solid ground. Then Harder looked at Whitmore's table and said, "Mr. Whitmore, I want to ask you directly. You acquired water rights adjacent to the Cross property 6 weeks before filing this deed challenge. Your firm has engaged in similar acquisitions in Saline and Riley counties prior to legal challenges in those counties. I'm not making a legal finding about that pattern at this time, but I want you to know that this court is aware of it. And I want you to understand that this court takes a serious view of legal processes used as instruments of commercial pressure rather than genuine dispute resolution." He paused. "Do you understand me?" The assembly hall quiet. The courthouse quiet was heavier. Whitmore said, "Yes, Your Honor." His voice was entirely composed. His hands, Clara noticed, were flat on the table. "Good," Harder said. He picked up the 1863 letter. Set it down again. "I'm prepared to rule today." The ruling took 7 minutes to read and could have been summarized in 2 sentences. The deed challenge was dismissed. The territorial filing irregularity was formally noted as a documented administrative artifact without legal significance, and the Cross Ranch property boundaries were confirmed as registered. In the gallery, Ada Clements let out a breath that was not quite a sound, but was completely audible. Tom Avery said nothing, but he put his hat back on with the particular decisive motion of a man who has been waiting to do that for some time. Billy made a sound that he converted imperfectly into a cough. Pete Darrow looked at Jed. Jed nodded once. That was sufficient. Clara sat very still. She felt the ruling settle over her, the way good news settles, not dramatically, not with the release she might have expected, but with a kind of deep spreading warmth, the warmth of something resolving that has been wound tight for too long. She felt Nathaniel's hand close over hers again under the table, and she turned her hand and held it back. And they sat in the county courthouse with the ruling still in the air around them, and did not say anything because there was nothing to say that the holding was not already saying. Whitmore left without speaking to anyone. Prescott followed. They moved through the courthouse with the efficiency of people who have somewhere to be that is not here, and they went, and the door closed behind them, and Clara thought, "Patient man. He'll be patient about this too. He'll find another angle in another county with another property that has a gap he can use. But not this one. Not today. Not this ranch." She turned to Holt, who was packing his briefcase with the methodical care of a man who considers the work done only when everything is back in its right place. "Thank you," she said. Holt looked at her over his spectacles. "Thank your account records," he said. "They were the backbone of this case. If the documentation had been incomplete, the 1863 letter alone would not have been sufficient." He paused. "You did good work, Miss Bellamy, very good work." She nodded. She did not deflect it the way she would have deflected it 4 months ago. She just received it cleanly and said thank you. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Ada Clements took both of her hands and squeezed them and said simply, "Good." Dora Finch said, "Whitmore will think twice before he tries this county again." Martha Darrow said, "Pete wants you to know the neighbor statement was the easiest thing he's ever signed because every word of it was true." Ed Greer said, "I should have gone looking for that 1863 letter 2 years ago. I'm glad I found it when it mattered." James was the last. He waited until the others had moved toward the door before he crossed the hallway to where she stood, and he looked at her with the particular expression of a younger sibling who has watched their older sibling become someone larger than the version they grew up with, and doesn't quite know what to do with the pride and the guilt simultaneously. "You did it," he said. "Holt did it," she said. "And Ed Greer, and Sam Clements, and Ada, and Dora, and Pete Darrow, and Tom, and Clara." He stopped her. "You built all of that. Those people, they showed up because of you, because of who you are." He paused. "I know I don't get to take credit for seeing that. I should have seen it a long time ago." He looked at his hands. "I'm trying to see it now." She looked at her brother. The wrong buttons on his coat. The honest, uncertain face of a young man trying to do better than he'd done. She thought about the trading post morning when he had known and said nothing, and she thought about the Bellamy house on a January evening when he had said, "I'm sorry," and meant it, and she thought about the fact that he was here today in the third to last row because he had decided to be. "I know you are," she said. "That's enough for now." He nodded. He looked relieved in a way that told her the relief was real. "Mama," he started. "Not today," she said gently. "Today is not the day for that conversation. Tell her the case was resolved. Tell her Nathaniel's property is secure." She paused. "Tell her I'm well." He put on his hat. "I will." He paused at the door. "You look like yourself, Clara. Like the real version. More every time I see you." She let that land. "Go home safe, James." He went. She stood in the courthouse hallway, with the February cold coming under the door and the sound of Willow Creek going about its midday business outside. And she let herself feel fully, and without management, everything that was present. The relief of the ruling. The warmth of the people who had come. The complicated, unresolved love she still had for her family. Not simple, not clean, but real. The way most true things were not simple or clean, but were real. The thing she was building here with this man and this ranch and these people who had decided she was worth knowing. Nathaniel came to stand beside her. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just stood with her in the hallway, shoulder to shoulder, the way two people stand when they have been through something together and have not yet found the words for it and have decided the words can wait. Then he said, "Come on, let's go home." Home. The word landed in her chest like something she had been reaching for a long time without knowing it. "Yes," she said. "Let's." The wedding was in April, when the Kansas prairie was doing the thing it did every spring that people who had only seen it in winter could not quite believe, turning green and extravagant and full of itself. Yellow wildflowers running along the fence lines and the creek running high and clear with snowmelt and the sky going on forever in every direction. It was not a small wedding, though neither of them had intended a large one. But Ada Clements and Dora Finch had views about what constituted an appropriate celebration, and their views had a way of becoming reality through the sheer organizational force of two women who had decided something mattered and were going to see it done properly. The assembly hall was used again, though, for a purpose that had nothing to do with Gerald Whitmore or county court filings, and Clara thought as she walked through the door on James's arm. James, who had asked quietly if he could, and whom she had said yes to quietly in return, that the hall smelled entirely different from the last time she'd been in it. Warmer, less formal, like something that had been waiting to be used for something good. Tom Avery stood at the front with Nathaniel and wore the expression of a man who has decided this is the most important he will ever look and is committed to sustaining it for the duration. Billy stood beside Tom and was crying before Clara had made it halfway down the aisle, which he did not bother to hide, which was the most Billy thing he had ever done. Pete and Jed were in the front row, and Pete had his hands folded in his lap and was looking at the middle distance with the focused composure of a man who is thinking very hard about not having any particular feelings, which meant he was having a great many. Margaret Henderson was there. Clara had not expected that. But Margaret Henderson was there in the fourth row beside Ruth Pratt, and when Clara's eyes met hers for a brief moment, Margaret looked at her with an expression that was not the assessment of the general store, or the assembly hall, or the whispered conversations in the trading post. It was something smaller and more honest than any of those things. It was the expression of a woman who has been wrong and knows it, and is sitting in a room choosing to acknowledge it, which was Clara thought more than she had ever expected from Margaret Henderson, and therefore worth more. Ed Greer was there. Daniel Holt had sent a letter which Tom read aloud at the supper table 2 nights before the wedding, congratulating them both and noting that he intended to use Clara's documentation methodology as a template for future territorial deed cases, which was, Nathaniel had said, approximately the highest compliment a lawyer from Topeka was capable of delivering. Her mother was not there. Clara had written to her a letter that had taken 4 drafts and 3 evenings because she had wanted to say the true thing and not the easy thing. She had said, "I am getting married. I want you to know because you are my mother, and that matters to me regardless of what has happened between us." I am not asking you to attend if it is too difficult. But I am telling you because I have decided that honesty is better than the alternative, even when it costs something. Her mother had sent a reply. One paragraph. It said, "Your father and I wish you well. I hope you are happy, Clara. I believe you are." She had read it 3 times. She had put it in the account ledger where she kept the things that mattered. She had cried briefly in the kitchen before anyone was up the way she cried now, efficiently, honestly, and without apology. Then she had made bread. Standing at the front of the assembly hall, beside Nathaniel Cross, with Tom's carefully maintained composure at her left, and Ada's unashamed, satisfied expression in the 3rd row, and Billy's complete and total failure to hold it together. In the second she felt something happen in her chest that she had been afraid for a very long time was simply not available to her. Not because she was unworthy of it. She had learned in the 4 months, and then the months after that, the unworthiness had been a story. Other people had told her so many times she had started telling it herself. She had learned what it felt like to stop. What she felt standing there was not relief. It was not gratitude, though there was gratitude. It was not even happiness, though there was that too. It was something more structural than any of those things. It was the feeling of being finally where she was supposed to be, not because she had nowhere else to go. Not because she had taken the best available option, not because someone had rescued her from a worse situation, but because she had looked at this life, this man, this place with clear eyes and full knowledge, and had said yes, deliberately and completely with her whole self. The judge. A different judge than Harder. A younger man who performed weddings with the cheerful efficiency of someone who genuinely liked the work, asked the questions. They gave the answers. And when the answers were given, Nathaniel Cross looked at her with his unguarded, unmanaged, entirely real face and said something that she had not expected and that she would remember for the rest of her life. He said, "You saved this ranch." She looked at him. "You saved me first?" she said. He shook his head. "You were already saving yourself," he said. "I just didn't get in the way." She thought about a trading post at dawn. She thought about a question that had hit her directly below the sternum. She thought about a wagon and a kitchen and a door with a latch on the inside. She thought about bread and accounts and county court hearings, and a woman who had decided standing in a courthouse hallway in February that home was not a place you waited to be given, but a place you chose. She squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. And somewhere in the rows behind them, Billy stopped pretending he wasn't crying, and Tom Avery permitted himself for exactly 3 seconds. A smile of the genuine and unmanaged variety, and Ada Clements wrote something in her notebook that nobody would ever see, and Pete Darrow looked at Jed, and Jed nodded once, and that was that. The years that followed were not easy years, because no years on a frontier ranch were easy, and Clara had never asked for easy. She had asked for honest and fair and chosen, and she got all 3 in full measure. The ranch grew, not dramatically, not overnight, but with the solid, patient growth of something built on good ground by people who knew what they were doing. Tom stayed. Billy stayed longer than anyone expected, and then left for Missouri, and came back 6 months later with a wife and sheepish expression, and settled into a piece of the county that had always been looking for him. Pete and Jed continued their eloquent partnership of silence, and showed no signs of changing it. Ada Clements came on Thursdays for 3 more years, and then the Thursday sessions became something else, a loose gathering of ranch wives from 3 counties that had its own name by the time Clara stopped counting, something that Ada had organized with her notebook and her efficiency and her particular brand of determined goodwill, and that had, by general consensus, made the county measurably better informed about water rights seed prices and the proper method for a standing soup rotation. Gerald Whitmore did not attempt another acquisition in this county. He moved his operations east toward different counties with different land agents, and the last word Clara heard of him was that he'd attempted a similar deed challenge in Douglas County and had encountered, somewhat to his surprise, a lawyer who had heard of the Cross Ranch case and had the Riley County precedent already in hand. Ed Greer, who had an interest in these things, tracked this development with quiet satisfaction and mentioned it to Clara the following Thursday. Evelyn Bellamy came to the ranch the following Christmas. She came with James, who had by then found steady work at a neighboring operation, and was learning slowly to be a man Clara could trust. Evelyn stood in the kitchen and looked at what her daughter had built. The organized shelves, the accounts on the desk, the kitchen garden in its winter dormancy outside the window, and she said very quietly, the thing Clara had waited 25 years to hear. "I was wrong," Evelyn said, "about what you were worth." Clara stood in her kitchen, held her mother's eyes, and did not perform forgiveness. She had not fully arrived at, because she had promised herself she would not be dishonest even about the hard things. "I know," she said. "Thank you for saying it. It was not everything. It was something. It was enough for now." James, who was standing in the doorway eating a biscuit, said, "These are the best biscuits I've ever had in my life. Clara and I want that on the record." "It's on the record, James," she said. "Good," he said, and took another one. On an evening. In the second spring, the spring after the wedding, when the wildflowers were back along the fence lines and the creek was running and the prairie was doing its annual impossible thing. Nathaniel came to find her in the kitchen at 5 o'clock, which was unusual, and stood in the doorway with an expression she had learned to read as the one he wore when he had something important to say and was deciding how to say it. She wiped her hands on her apron. "What is it?" He crossed the kitchen. He took both her hands in his. He looked at her with the face she knew best, the real one, the unguarded one, the one that had been finding its way to her since a trading post at dawn when he had asked a question and changed everything. "I just want you to know," he said, "that there has not been a single day since you walked into that kitchen and told me your bread was excellent, and I should know what I was getting for the $1.50. He stopped, started again. "Not one day where I have not been certain that you are exactly where you belong." She looked at him. At this man who had not rescued her, she had never needed rescuing. She had been saving herself since before she knew that's what she was doing, but who had stood aside and let her do it, and then stood beside her while she did, and had called that love, because that was what it was. "I know," she said. "So have I." She had come to Cross Ranch with nothing but her coat and her skills, and a stubborn, battered refusal to lie all the way down when the world said she should. She had left nothing behind worth keeping, and built something worth having. And the woman who had once been offered for 2 sacks of flour and a winter's worth of supplies, the woman who had been told in 100 different voices and 100 different ways that she was too much and not enough, and that no one was coming for her, stood in her kitchen on a spring evening in Kansas, and understood with the full settled certainty of a woman who has earned every inch of the ground she stands on that she had never needed anyone to come for her. She had come for herself, and that had been enough all along.